Chapter 691. As a commander of the undead army, the Dark Knight did not charge forward to fight the terrifying flame demon. On the contrary, it stood at the back of the battlefield and did not make any further moves after using its dark spear to interrupt the terrifying flame demon's spellcasting. All it did was silently observe the entire battlefield from atop its skeletal warhorse. As a mid-level undead, it already had enough intelligence to determine which target posed the greatest threat to the undead army. Under its cold and sharp soul fire perception, it discovered that the terrifying flaming man at the forefront wasn't the strongest enemy at all. Instead, it was the few human wizards that had been following behind the burning man that posed the greatest and most direct threat to its life. Thus, after interrupting the terrifying flame demon spellcasting, the Dark Knight focused most of its attention on the few strange-looking spellcasters in the opposing team. As expected, not long after it made its move, the spellcaster who was wrapped in a black robe at the back of the enemy's team disappeared mysteriously. The Dark Knight tugged on the reins, and the skeletal warhorse, which was clad in black iron horse armor and had a spiral horn on its head, its eyes and hooves burning with the inextinguishable black flames of death, and its nostrils occasionally spewing out scorching sparks, stood up, raising its head and letting out a terrifying dark neigh. The Dark Knight took the opportunity to remove the long blade hanging by the neck of the skeletal war horse, waving it around in its hands as it surveyed its surroundings warily. The Dark Knight was also very wary of these foreign spellcasters. In terms of spellcasting power, these outsiders might not be that much stronger than the natives of this realm. But in terms of the variety of spellcasting techniques and the strangeness of the wizard spells, even 2 or 3 spellcasters from this realm combined would not be able to match up to these evil witches. Just as the Dark Knight was on full alert, the skeletal war horse beneath it began to move restlessly. Without a sound, a giant shadow appeared beneath the skeletal war horse. As the dark matter gathered, thick black tentacles reached out from the shadows, wrapping around the 4 hooves and body of the skeletal warhorse. Damn it, the Dark Knight cursed and slapped the horse's head, prepared to charge out with its horse. However, since this spell was cast by a Tier 3 Dark Witch, how could she allow a Tier 2 Undead Knight to escape? As the dark substance suddenly expanded, dozens of black tentacles stretched out like octopuses, instantly wrapping around the skeletal warhorse and the Dark Knight's bodies. No matter how the Dark Knights and skeletal warhorses tried to slash and struggle, the black tentacles did not budge. They were slowly pulled into the giant shadow. After a while, when they completely disappeared into the shadow burped like a beast that had eaten its fill and slowly began to shrink and dissipate. Finally, the shadow and the Dark Knight disappeared without a trace. Ulthar silently appeared at the back of the team. Grim watched the entire process from afar, his heart filled with shock. The Dark Knight was a Grade 2 undead creature. Even if Grim went all out, he would have to pay a hefty price to kill it. Yet, in the hands of a Tier 3 Dark Witch, the Berserker hadn't even had a chance to retaliate before, after hesitating for a moment, Grim did not know how to describe the battle just now. Through the AI chip's senses, he could clearly see that Ulthar had appeared beneath the Dark Knight and opened up a small path to the Shadow Plane. To be honest, the Dark Knight had not truly died. He had only been pulled into the Shadow Plane by the Dark Witch. However, the Shadow Plane was the second home of the Dark Witches. It was easy to imagine what would happen to the Dark Knight there. If he was facing an opponent of the same level, Ulthar would not have dared to be so careless, spending so much effort to connect the 2 worlds. However, against a Dark Knight who only had brute force, such a clumsy method was more effective. He avoided a pointless and cheap battle, and used his powerful strength to suppress his opponent, directly KOing him. Without the Dark Knight's command, the undead army in the battlefield immediately became chaotic. Grim immediately transformed into a tall flame demon, sweeping through the battlefield with the terrifying flame demon. The first to be eliminated were the skeleton spellcasters. 2 5-meter-tall flame demons entered the ranks of the skeleton spellcasters at the same time, then set fire to them without restraint, turning the entire space into a terrifying inferno of lava. While the skeleton spellcasters were shockingly powerful when they worked together, they could not even compare to the metal zombies in terms of individual defense. With the two flame demons wreaking havoc, they naturally fell into disarray, unable to form a battle formation. In just 5 minutes, Grim and the terrifying flame demon destroyed the skeleton spellcasters. They then turned their attention to the dark cave that continuously spewed out undead creatures. First, they used a fiery magic wall to seal the entrance of the cave, cutting off their path of reinforcements. Then, Grim and the terrifying flame demon turned into masters of arson, setting the entire battlefield ablaze. The scorching heat, coupled with a large area of crimson flame storm, slaughtered all the undead in the large cave, turning them into a pile of bones and charred corpses. And at this moment, the frenzied undead used their ice-cold bodies to crush the super wall of fire that blocked the entrance of the cave and began to pour into the battlefield that was full of devastation once again. What do I do? Are we going to waste our time here with these undead? Grim could not help but look back at Alice. Alice immediately understood what he meant. She pointed at a cave that was continuously spewing undead creatures. This way, Grim didn't hesitate to rush towards the hole. He once again set fire to the other cave entrances, leaving only this passage open. Then, the terrifying flame demon took a step that shook the earth and the mountains, crashing into the passage while facing the surging tide of undead creatures. Grim, on the other hand, cleaned up the scattered undead that the terrifying flame demon had left behind and strode into the passage. The whole process was clean and neat, without the slightest hesitation, showing his complete trust in Alice. The Dark Witch, Ulthar, silently watched this scene, her eyes hidden in the shadows, inexplicably shining with a strange light. The relationship between Alice and this wizard seemed to be different from what was rumored. For the first time, she could not help but feel a little curious about them. Emotions were something that almost did not exist between wizards. In the minds of most northern witches, emotions would only make people weak and even become a witch's fatal weakness. In history, there were some powerful northern witches who ended up tragically because their lovers or relatives were captured by the enemy. Therefore, the northern witches had always held a disdainful and fearful attitude towards emotions. The northern witches were either dominated by the northern witches or were only the favored concubines of powerful witches. Their status was very awkward. However, between Alice and this wizard called Grim, there seemed to be a tacit understanding and trust that surpassed the ordinary feelings between a man and a woman. This had seriously angered Ulthar. Although Alice's identity was not recognized by most northern witches because of her rank, she was still the leader of all Destiny witches. Even a grade 3 wizard Ulthar could only interact and talk with her on an equal level. But now, this Alice, who was ranked as the leader of the 8 great witches, had a real relationship with a wizard. This was undoubtedly a great challenge to Ulthar's sacred belief as a witch. How could such a weak witch be qualified to lead the Destiny witches? How could she be qualified to lead the Destiny clan on the path of revival? Ulthar thought to herself. However, her thoughts were blocked by a tight shadow barrier. Even if Alice was close to her, she would not be able to sense anything. Moreover, at this time, Alice's full attention was focused on the illusory guidance of fate, constantly pointing out the path for Grim. In the first half of the journey, they saw many huge underground caves. As they moved against the current, they continued to move deeper into the ground. The caves and tunnels began to gradually shrink, becoming narrower and narrower. Every 100 steps, they would see a large cave that was like a transit point. Then, Grim and the others would face a series of caves of various sizes. Shambling zombies and skeletal warriors were gushing out from every hole in the ground. In fact, as soon as the battle started, they had already set off in the underground. However, these zombies and skeletons were too slow, which allowed the ghouls to dominate the entire battlefield. Now that Grim and the others had entered the underground space, they had fallen into a terrifying sea of undead. Even if they managed to rescue Mary and the others, they would have to fight their way out of here with great difficulty. However, just as Grimm and the others passed through the caves and tunnels under Alice's guidance and incinerated countless undead along the way, there seemed to be some strange movements in the depths of the underground. The entire underground tunnel was trembling slightly. Through the winding tunnel, Grimm and the others could vaguely hear a loud roar, followed by an earth-shattering roar of thunder and lightning. It seemed like there was another unknown battlefield. Grimm's eyes lit up. The Grade 3 druid had followed Mary into the underground world. If there were any outsiders in this paradise of the undead, it could only be them. Mary's party did not have any powerful spellcasters, so prepare for battle. Lady Ulthar, if it's really that guy, we'll need your help later. Grimm became excited as he was about to face a Grade 3 druid. However, as the leader, he calmly started assigning tasks to the team. Ulthar, who was the last to respond, did not respond. However, the shadow around her body began to strengthen silently. Everyone stopped moving forward and stared at the cave that the voice came from, waiting silently. Chapter 692. Antoril felt that he was so unlucky. With the druid's affinity with nature, he thought he could smoothly pass through every forest in the Callan continent. But unfortunately, this underground world was not as friendly to him as he thought. Ever since he tracked the group of vampires into the Scar of Death, Antoril was horrified to find that it was almost a land of death. Ghost trees, withered vines, disgusting mutated magic plants, and countless undead creatures. Relying on his superior strength, Antoril plunged into the terrible, twisting maze of the underground world without any hesitation. It had to be said that with Antoril's powerful individual strength, there were almost no creatures in the underground maze that could trap him or hold him back. When he transformed into the Thunder Rock with lightning talent, those stiff and sluggish zombies and skeletons couldn't even touch his feathers before they were blasted into pieces by the lightning falling from the sky. The Thunder Rock was a natural lightning-type magical beast. Whether it was flying or attacking, it would naturally trigger the Lightning Strike spell. This Tier 1 spell could deal 40 to 60 points of lightning damage, and it also had a paralyzing effect. So when a large group of skeletons, zombies, and ghouls blocked the Thunder Rock's way, they were greeted by hundreds of gorgeous silver lightning chains. No matter how many zombies and skeletons there were, they couldn't keep up with the speed of thousands of lightning strikes. The group of ghouls that once blocked Grimm's way were blasted into charred corpses by the lightning strikes before they could even touch the edge of the giant Thunder Rock's feathers. Antoril's Thunder Rock was rampaging in the underground world. Everywhere he went, there were dazzling lightning forests everywhere he went. And these undead that wandered the underground world all year round could be considered to be unlucky. They all became sacrifices under the wrath of the Level 3 druid. The shattered soul fires were extinguished one after another, and their hideous and evil bodies began to melt as they returned to this strange underground space. To be honest, before breaking into this strange space, Antoril was still full of looking for traces of those vampires. But as he continued to go deeper, he saw so many evil, twisted magic plants and countless terrifying undead. The Level 3 druid's heart was filled with anger. All druids were children of nature. They loved the forest and nature more than they loved their own lives. Because of this, they found it even more difficult to tolerate the foreign race's actions of destroying the forest and disturbing nature. Ever since he entered the Scar of Death, everything he saw here, whether it was the flora or fauna or the environment, was strange and distorted. Here, he sensed an abnormally powerful death aura, an evil aura that severely violated the laws of nature and shouldn't exist in this world. Therefore, he quickly forgot his original mission and focused his attention on studying and investigating this evil death aura. He went through one tunnel and cave after another, and he also saw a large number of terrifying undead creatures. In the end, he was stopped by a Grade 3 necromancer, a lich. In the underground, at the end of a labyrinth filled with undead, he and the Grade 3 Necromancer engaged in a fierce battle of life and death. If this battle was a fair, one-on-one duel, then Antoril would definitely be the final winner. Unfortunately, this was the territory of the undead. Antoril had good reason to suspect that the underground here had been modified by some powerful undead, opening up a plane crack leading to the bone plane. Otherwise, the Grade 3 Necromancer wouldn't be able to easily summon as many as 2 digits of Grade 2 Death Knights and 3 digits of Skeleton Mages. In the face of the overwhelming attack of the middle and high-level undead and the sneak attack of a despicable lich of the same level, Antoril's wild and powerful Thunder Rock was hit with a series of disgusting curses. Then, a group of fearless Grade 2 Death Knights pounced on him and attacked him. These Death Knights were mutants among the undead knights. They had a variety of knight combat skills, such as Slash of the Dead, Double Strike, and so on. In particular, Slash of the Dead could add negative energy damage to ordinary physical attacks that ignored defense. And this was actually what Antoril was most afraid of. As a Grade 3 druid, Antoril's rank was 1 rank higher than these Death Knights. In this case, it became extremely difficult for the enemy to break through his physical and magical defense. But with Slash of the Dead, these Death Knights could trigger a negative energy impact almost every 5 attacks. Therefore, when Antoril showed off his might by pecking and clawing the 6 Death Knights, his Thunder Rock form was already riddled with wounds, and his body was full of crisscrossed knife marks and rotting wounds. Out of desperation, in order to not die in this lowly and filthy place, Antoril could only swallow his anger and run away. Then, he ran into Grim and the other 2 who were waiting for him. Almost at the same time Antoril hurried out of the tunnel, the volcano of doomsday that Grim and the Balrog had jointly activated erupted under his feet. The ground continued to bulge and crack in the rumbling flow of magma, and a scorching red, heat-inducing pillar of magma spewed out from the cracks, just in time to trap Antoril in its most powerful area. There, terrible fire poison, flames, and elemental flames raged wildly, and the temperature in the core area could reach as high as 4,000 to 5,000 degrees. Caught off guard, Antoril was hit by this pillar of lava, and his body involuntarily flew into the air above the cave. His entire body was cleansed from head to toe by the boiling flames and magma. If it weren't for the fact that a Grade 3 druid's magic resistance was also shockingly high, most of Antoril's body would have been roasted and burnt into ashes. So Antoril screamed shrilly as he frantically ran out of the lava pillars that were constantly splashing. When he escaped from the sea of fire with the help of the nature barrier, his already wounded body was now burned to the point that his flesh was torn apart. Large and small blood blisters and festering wounds were also constantly flowing out of his body with purplish-black blood. Rushing out of the sea of fire, Antoril looked up and saw 2 tall flame demons standing side by side in the distance. He immediately understood that he had encountered another group of wizards. He forced his bloodshot eyes open and glared fiercely at the Tier 2 sorcerer who had ambushed him amidst the chaos. He roared, "A Tier 2 sorcerer like you dares to ambush me? I'll let you." However, before he could finish his words, the whole cave suddenly turned dark and inexplicably fell into a terrible darkness. Grim tried his best to open his eyes. Unfortunately, no matter how much he peeped and sensed, it was impossible for his vision to extend beyond 10 steps. In his mind, the AI chip's frantic prompts also made him secretly shocked. Warning, warning. Shadow space detected. Shadow space detected. Host's mental strength is completely suppressed. Physical vision reduced to 8 meters. Mental perception reduced to 10 meters. Host has lost control of the battlefield. Grim's heart trembled slightly. He did not expect a Grade 3 Dark Witch to have such terrifying power when she went all out. If the opponent's target was him, how long could he last under such a comprehensive suppression? 10 seconds? 5? Fortunately, the terrifying Balrog was by his side, and Grim's heart calmed down a little. Would Alice be all right under such a terrifying suppression? Thinking of this, Grim couldn't help but feel a little flustered. Without a sound, a soft and smooth little hand held his right hand. Grim turned around and saw Alice's gentle and quiet smile. "Don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself on the battlefield." As if sensing Grim's worry, Alice smiled sweetly. "Why? Do you want to see a battle between two grade 3 powerhouses?" Grim raised his dark eyebrows. "You have a way to break through Ulther's darkness invasion?" Alice smiled and stretched out her hand. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed Grim's forehead. "This is the blessing of fate that I, Alice, send to you. Now you can ignore the darkness." As a strange, cool sensation rushed into his eyes, Grim looked around in astonishment. He realized that the thick, ink-like darkness around him had gradually become thin and transparent. On the other side of the cavern, the druid in his Tier 3 Thunder Rock form was fighting the sinister Tier 3 Dark Witch, Ulther. Their battle was intense and dangerous. Both sides were going all out, and they did not have the time to pay attention to their surroundings. When they fought, it was rare for them to spend a long time preparing a powerful skill like Grim. Most of the time, they would use instantaneous spells to counter each other's attacks. The Thunder Rock transformed into a huge bolt of lightning. Amidst the terrifying rumbling of thunder, it continuously pecked at the Dark Witch, who was dodging and teleporting in all directions. The lightning bolts that were as thick as water tanks kept striking down, targeting the thin and withered figure in the dark. At this moment, the Dark Witch, Ulther, was shrouded by a strange, black cloud. The moment the lightning bolts came into contact with the black cloud, the blinding lightning ripples would be absorbed, and the Dark Witch no longer looked as imposing as before. The Dark Witch, Ulther, was quickly moving about in the shadows, flicking her jet-black, sharp hands and shooting a series of condensed darkness spheres of the Thunder Rock. These darkness spheres, which compressed the dark matter to its limits, had caused the Thunder Rock a lot of trouble. Even the Thundercloud barrier, which had a magic defense of 500 degrees, could not stop the darkness spheres from penetrating it. Once the darkness spheres came into contact with the Thunder Rock's body, they would rapidly expand from the size of a finger. The dark matter within them was like the most terrifying plague in the world, quickly invading the Thunder Rock's body. Chapter 693. At the entrance of a dark tunnel near the battlefield, a lich exuding a sinister aura was silently observing the battle between two outsiders. With the help of the deep darkness spell, even if the outsiders walked past it, they would not be able to see its existence through the inky shadows. While peeking at the battle in the cave, its lower jaw gently opened and closed, as if it was silently communicating with a powerful existence that was not present. As a lich that was transformed from an elf, the flesh on its body had already withered and decayed, leaving only a thin layer of wrinkled skin on top of its skinny, withered skeleton. Its former beauty and youthfulness had disappeared, and no one was able to guess its original race from its ferocious and terrifying appearance. A black human-skinned robe was draped over its body, faintly radiating a faint aura of fear. Its bony fingers, which were as smooth as new, were covered with magic rings of various sizes. However, there was only one piece of equipment that satisfied it the most, and that was the Sorcerer Bone Staff at its waist. According to its master, the Sorcerer Bone Staff was taken from the spine of a high-grade wizard, and it was taken when he was still alive. Hence, other than the powerful power of death, it was also imbued with that necromancer's strong curse aura. Any offensive spell cast by the Sorcerer Bone Staff would be imbued with curse aura, and it could ignore the opponent's magic resistance and spell defense. It was because of this rare characteristic that Lich Annis was able to make a name for himself under his master's command. The Sorcerer Bone Staff had become a precious treasure that he could not bear to let go of. For the past 100 years, he had been in charge of guarding this underground space. Unfortunately, after hundreds of years of peace, a group of despicable intruders had disrupted the peace and order of this place. The first group of intruders turned out to be a group of vampires from the wizard world. After Lich and Nos sent his men to capture them, Before he had time to think about how to deal with them, the spies and scouts he had set up outside the underground space were triggered. This time, there were two different teams that had intruded into the underground space. One team had only one person, and that was the terrifying Thunder Rock that had been transformed from a Grade 3 druid. The other team consisted of 3 otherworld sorcerers, one of whom was a Tier 3 witch. Faced with such powerful invaders, the Lich and Nos had no choice but to summon an organized undead army from deep underground to surround and eliminate these restless creatures. It even led its personal guards to ambush the lone Tier 3 druid. Unfortunately, the druid, who had mastered many wild transformation abilities, had thick skin and thick flesh. He actually withstood the charge of the Death Knights and escaped right under the nose of the Lich and Nos. Meanwhile, the Tier 2 Death Knight Legion that Lich Annis had spent over 500 years to nurture had lost nearly 1/3 of its members to that druid. That made Annis heartache. Of course, if he still had it. Enraged, the corpse Lich and Nos led a large group of his subordinates in pursuit of the intruders. It was only then that he discovered, to his surprise, that the two groups of intruders were fighting in his territory. However, just as it was hiding at the side, waiting for the perfect opportunity to launch a sneak attack on the 2 Grade 3 magi, its murky eyes inadvertently caught sight of a male and a female magus on the other side of the cave. For some reason, when its evil and cold gaze fell on the little level 1 witch, she actually raised her head and looked at it in surprise. Yes, the other party was slowly and seriously sizing him up. The Lich and Nos could not help but be shocked. Putting aside the fact that the other party was only a Tier 1 witch, how did she detect his obscure mental scan? Just the deep darkness spell that he was currently enchanted with was not something that could be detected by ordinary probing spells. Moreover, the other party had indeed not detected his presence. She had only been startled the moment his gaze landed on her. Not to mention the Tier 2 wizard beside the little witch, even the 2 Tier 3 wizards in the cavern did not detect his spying. How did a Tier 1 witch see through it? Perhaps it was because the Lich Annos' strange energy waves had disturbed it, but a powerful mental consciousness suddenly descended on its body. I didn't expect to meet someone favored by fate here. Hee, looks like I'm in luck today. The master of the Tier 3 Lich and Nos saw Alice through its eyes and could not help but laugh dryly. And Nos, I need that little witch. Bring her to me. As for her companions, capture them first. Don't let them escape. Master, there are 2 Tier 3 wizards in the cavern. I'm afraid I can't take them down. The Lich and Nos could not help but say. Useless. You've been with me for so long, but you can't even defeat 2 wizards of the same rank. Useless. The consciousness in Annos' body cursed. However, it seemed to be worried that the Lich would really let the toys in front of it escape. It then said coldly, "Look after them. I'll send Luke over immediately." Hearing Luke's name, the Lich and Nos immediately relaxed. As one of the many Tier 3 servants under his master, and Nos knew that Luke was actually his master's most trusted subordinate. Luke was also a terrifying Lich, a Tier 4 undead Lich. Just as the Lich and Nos was lost in thought in the dark tunnel, Alice could not help but frown. What's wrong? Grim looked into the distance, watching the battle between the 2 Tier 3 powerhouses with an excited expression. Frankly speaking, the battle between Tier 3 powerhouses was not as lively as the one between Grim and the Balrog, and the effects were astonishing. Once Grim made his move, an earth-shattering meteor shower, earth-shattering lava pillar, and surging lava pond. Putting aside the lethality of the battle, just the effects of the battle were cool and enjoyable to watch. However, it was very rare to see these Tier 3 powerhouses cast large-scale spells that were full of sound and light effects. They quickly teleported and jumped continuously, quietly exchanging instant cast spells with each other. Although the effects of the battle were simple, the AI chip's feedback showed that the instant spells they cast were all at least 500 degrees of energy. That kind of spell could definitely pierce through Grim's lava shield and fire shield in one hit. This meant that if Grimm were to fight with any of them, he would be forced to run away. Even if he put up defensive spells and magical defenses, they would be destroyed in an instant by his opponent. The difference in strength between a Tier 2 and a Tier 3 powerhouse had never been so obvious before. It was difficult to make up for it with killing methods and casting techniques. Although he could not enter the battlefield and scan the data of the battle, he could still use the AI chip's long-range senses and records to gather a rough picture of the Tier 3 powerhouses' fighting styles and methods. This would be of great help to him in his quest to reach the Tier 3 realm. However, even though he was fully focused on the battlefield, he still kept a portion of his attention on Alice. Noticing her abnormality, he immediately probed her. There's a Tier 3 necromancer spying on the battlefield. Alice hesitated, not knowing how to describe her perception of destiny. A Tier 3 necromancer? Grimm's attention was immediately drawn back to the topic. Is there danger? If there's danger, I can take you and retreat first. Grimm used a spiritual link to ask Alice. I don't know. Alice was evidently confused by what she had sensed. I can see an indescribably large and terrifying darkness behind it, but I can't tell what it is. My divination tells me that we might be in great danger, but my perception of destiny did not give me any warning. Could it be that the spatial structure here has distorted your perception? Grimm could not help but guess. The power of destiny is the most mysterious force in the world. No other force can distort or obscure it. Alice shook her head. Then could it be that there's a powerful existence behind it, and its power has exceeded the range of your perception of destiny? Alice hesitated for a moment and said with uncertainty, although I'm only at the Tier 1 realm, I'm still the leader of the Witches of Destiny. I'm blessed by the power of destiny. If it wants to obscure my perception of destiny, then, unless it's a powerful being that has crossed the threshold of the Tier 4 realm, a powerful being, Grimm could not help but be speechless. To be honest, a Tier 3 or Tier 4 being was already a terrifying existence that he could not fight against. As for those who had crossed the threshold of the Tier 4 realm and could freely traverse the void, they were simply too far away from his circle of activity. It was so far away that Grimm did not even want to imagine it. That was why when Alice suddenly mentioned it, Grimm grimaced in his mind for a long time, but could not imagine what a powerful being would look like. Perhaps, they would look exactly like the Tier 6 Great Wizard Salibo. However, just as Grimm was trying his best to imagine, the outcome of the battle was finally decided. The Dark Witch won, and the Druid lost. As a Tier 3 being that was second only to the top beings in the realm, both sides had the power to destroy the world. Therefore, even if the Dark Witch defeated Antoril while he was seriously injured and dispirited, it was still a difficult task to completely defeat him. Chapter 694. However, just as Antoril and Ulthar were fighting in the middle of the cave, a new enemy appeared on the battlefield. Seriously speaking, this time, it was not a complete enemy, but a strange head. It was a protruding head of a lich that was carved out of translucent magical crystals. The crystal head was not big, but it was unusually clear. On top of the head was a gorgeous magic crown that radiated colorful light, and its empty eye sockets were inlaid with two strange rubies that blocked the scarlet soul fire behind it. When the lower jaw of the head opened and closed to speak, Grimm could even clearly see that the neat rows of teeth were not real teeth, but carved out of magical gems that contained strange power. With these powerful magical gems, the Lich's head did not even need to chant incantations to fight the enemy. With just a light tap of the upper jaw, the magical gems that were customized to be magic sequencers would be quickly activated, and the enemy would be completely drowned in a storm of rapid spells. According to Grimm's knowledge, the weakest Lich in the entire multiverse was a level 3 creature. Once they gathered enough resources and magic tools to create an immortal body, they would immediately jump to level 4. The Lich in front of him had barely created an immortal Lich's head for itself, so its basic strength should be at the beginning of level 4. Of course, if it could create a Lich's body within 1,000 years, Then it could jump to the advanced level 4. But for the current battlefield, a level 4 lich was terrifying enough. Therefore, when he saw the crystal head appear and block the druid and witch's escape route, Grim did not say anything. He immediately grabbed Alice's waist and turned around, wanting to use Flame Leap to escape the battlefield. But as soon as he turned around, he froze. A sinister lich had already blocked his escape route and was using the lich bone staff in his right hand to knock on his left hand. The white bone staff and the skeletal hand collided with each other, producing a heart-wrenching, crisp sound. Grim's heart sank to the bottom when he saw the strange robe shrouded in black light and the dazzling magic aura on the other party's body. Grim squinted his eyes slightly, covering the blue light that was leaking from the chip's full operation. He began to analyze the entire battlefield, looking for an opportunity to escape. The AI chip operated frantically for a while and very quickly provided 5 ways to escape from this dangerous situation. However, 3 of them required abandoning Alice to be carried out perfectly, so Grim could only reluctantly abandon them. After the AI chip's rapid analysis and summarization, the remaining 2 escape plans gradually merged into one, forming a plan that had the highest chance of escaping. 27%. No matter how the AI chip calculated, the chances of Grim and Alice successfully escaping this time was less than 27%. Making a move with such a low probability was undoubtedly a huge risk. But looking at the situation before him, he had no choice but to do so. Otherwise, by the time the Tier 4 Lich finished off Entorier and Ulthar, he wouldn't even have a 27% chance. The terrifying flame demon had self-destructed. No matter which plan it was, the best way to distract the enemy was to order the terrifying Grade 2 flame demon to self-destruct. The Grade 4 Lich was now targeting the 2 Grade 3 Lich, which meant that the only enemy Grim had to deal with was the Grade 3 Lich in front of him. As a Grade 2 Fire Lich, Grim did not have any spells that could directly threaten the Grade 3 Lich. Hence, the self-destruction of the terrifying flame demon was probably the only way he could pin down the Grade 3 Lich. Grim gritted his teeth and was about to proceed with the plan, but Alice, who was leaning against him, gently pulled him back and shook her head. In this short moment of hesitation, the situation in the arena changed drastically once again. The 2 Grade 3 Lich had been defeated. The heavily injured Druid Entorier was almost at his last breath when he was hit by the Lich's skull's torrent of spells. He lay on the ground and could no longer move. The Dark Witch Ulthar, who was still in good condition, also chose to escape at the first moment. Unfortunately, facing a Grade 4 Lich, Ulthar could not escape even if he used all his methods. Shadow movement? Ulthar's thin and withered body had just turned into a shadow body, and before she could squeeze into the shadows, she was hit by a soul fire. The silver soul fire that burned brightly on top of her head lit up the space around Ulthar, dispersing the shadows and darkness that gathered around her. Her short-distance shadow movement was blocked, so Ulthar could only quickly open a spatial crack and escape into the shadow plane. With the unhindered movement of the shadow plane, she could quickly increase the distance between her and the strange Lich's skull, and then escape easily. Unfortunately, her plan was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. The huge ruby embedded in the eyes of the Lich's skull shot a strange spell at the spatial crack, and the crack actually closed up at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ulthar, who had just entered the shadow plane, was ejected from the space again, and the half of her body that was stuck in the shadow plane suddenly disappeared. Ulthar screamed miserably. Anyone who had half of their body suddenly devoured would be in excruciating pain like she did. If she hadn't transformed into a shadow body, she would have been gravely injured and on the verge of death. The Lich's skull's relentless pursuit drove Ulthar crazy. She raised her head and let out a shrill cry. Shadow spears appeared out of nowhere and shot towards the floating crystal head. The Lich's skull did not even react to the Tier 3 Dark Witch's counterattack. The Lich's skull did not even have the time to cast the most basic magic shield and elemental protection, and the shadow spears devoured it. Haha, that Tier 4 Lich was too careless. While such thoughts lingered in Ulther's mind, the floating lich's skull had already flown out of the shadow plane's suicide zone. Not a single scratch could be seen on its translucent crystal skull, which was as smooth, as new, and flawless as ever. Damn it, damn it, damn it. This was the first time Ulther experienced the terror of the lich's immortal body. Did undead like liches have any weaknesses? There was soul fire. It could be said that all undead only had one fatal weakness, and that was the soul fire hidden deep within their skulls. In order to protect this soul fire, many undead had evolved skulls that were tougher than steel to prevent their enemies from killing them with a single blow. The lich, which stood at the top of the undead, took this advantage to the extreme. It used the world's most precious and sturdiest magic crystal to create a near-perfect soul fire dwelling. The crystal skull seemed to be made of a thin layer of crystal glass, which made it look weak and fragile. However, in reality, its magic resistance and physical resistance were astonishingly high. The Tier 4 Lich Luke, for example, had created a crystal skull that was immune to all spells and physical attacks below Tier 3. If a Tier 3 or higher spell or physical attack wanted to damage the Lich's skull, it would have to focus its power on a single point to shatter it. The Lich's skull was not afraid of Ulther's large-scale elemental attack. Therefore, Lich Luke controlled the crystal skull and floated to Ulther's side. He resisted the Lich's crazy counterattack and used an instant withering spell to defeat the Dark Witch. At this moment, rows of Death Knights walked out of the tunnels behind Lich Anos. Judging from their imposing manner, they seemed to be Tier 2 undead. Grim completely gave up this time. If Alice had not stopped him, even if he used the Balrog's self-destruction to force the Tier 3 Lich away, he would have run into these Death Knights while escaping. If it was a one-on-one battle, Grim was 80% sure that he could kill one of the Death Knights within 15 minutes. After all, when a spellcaster faced a warrior who only had brute strength, he could use teleportation to increase the distance between them and attack to wear down the opponent's defense bit by bit. If Grim were to face two Death Knights, he would have a high chance of winning if he used all his trump cards. If there were 3 Death Knights, Grim could only run away and avoid the battle passively. But looking at the scene in front of him, groups of Death Knights walked out of the tunnels and formed a battle formation. Soon, there were 21 of them. How could a mere Grade 2 fire wizard like Grim stand a chance against such a team? So, under Alice's signal, Grim had no choice but to withdraw his terrifying flame demon and obediently surrender. After Grim and the others were captured, the group of undead slowly dragged them into the depths of the underground. For some reason, Grim could feel that the group of undead seemed to value Alice more than Ulther and Antoril. After the Tier 4 Lich bound Alice with a fixed body spell, he lifted her with a light beam and flew into the depths of the underground first. Grim, Ulther, and Antoril were escorted to a temporary camp by the Undead Legion led by the Tier 3 Lich Anos. There Grim saw an innumerable number of intermediate and high-level undead, as well as the Undead Legion that filled the entire underground space. Chapter 695. This was a gloomy and terrifying magic hall. After the Rank 4 Lich had dumped Alice here, it had left without a care in the world. Alice struggled to get up from the cold floor, tidied up her messy hair and clothes, and began to leisurely look at the magic hall in front of her. At first sight of this magic hall, Alice's most intuitive feeling was so big, so tall. This was clearly the underground of the Callan continent, but this group of strange undead had opened up a huge cave here, and then built a tall and magnificent magic hall. Alice stood in the middle of the hall and looked around, and found that she could not see the surrounding walls with her eyesight. Although this tall and empty space was shrouded in a thick mass of darkness, it should not be able to block or weaken Alice's vision. The only possibility was that her position was more than a kilometer away from the edge of the hall. Only under such circumstances could the situation before their eyes occur. Alice looked up at the sky again. The high dome gave her a feeling of distance and emptiness. A beam of cold, strange, white light shone on her, making her feel even more lonely and cold. Although everything here was so strange, Alice was not surprised as she leisurely strolled inside. This was because, since Alice woke up here, she could feel a strange gaze cast on her, silently observing her from all angles. Now, she was like an ant locked in a small glass bottle by humans, and her future was unpredictable. The other party was also lying at the mouth of the bottle, using a different kind of vision to observe and study her. You should know why I asked you to come here, right? Suddenly, an abnormally grand and cold voice echoed in this huge palace. It was difficult to tell the gender of the other party from a voice. Alice nodded her head slightly. Of course, you want me to predict the whereabouts of an item for you. If I can't even predict this, I'm afraid you won't waste your time on me. Hee. The only good thing about dealing with people favored by fate like you is that there's no need for so much nonsense. The loud voice continued. Okay, now tell me your request. As long as you can give me a satisfactory answer, I will pay you for the divination. I'm here for a scepter of prophecy. Scepter of prophecy? Are you talking about this one? Along with a loud roar, a magic mirror appeared in front of Alice. Inside the magic mirror, there was a huge, simple, and crude dragon cave. The center of the dragon cavern was piled high with shiny gold coins and all kinds of magic gems, weapons, armor, and magic tools. At the top of the pile of gold coins, there was a magic staff that shone with a colorful radiance. Judging from the design and the magic waves, it was exactly the scepter of prophecy that Alice had been dreaming of. Alice's eyes immediately shone with an intense light of desire. She used all her strength to control her body from reaching forward to grab the shadow in the water mirror. Yes, my lord, what I need is this scepter of prophecy. Alice calmed herself down and focused on the conversation. No problem. The grand voice chuckled. As long as you can divine the whereabouts of an item for me, this scepter will be yours. So easy. So easy. The scepter of prophecy that she had spent so much manpower and resources and risked her life to come to this fair plane was just so easily obtained. Alice calmed down and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Since the other party was willing to use a semi-divine weapon as a reward, the value of the item for divination could be imagined. Alice knew very well that the price she had to pay for each divination was proportional to the value of the item. The more valuable the item, the more difficult the divination would be, and the more shocking the price she had to pay. Compared to the reward for divination, there was another problem that worried Alice more. My lord, do you mean? As long as I provide you with sufficient details of the whereabouts of the item, you will allow me and my companions to leave with the scepter of prophecy? Alice asked tentatively. That's basically what I mean. However, I'm only dealing with you, so after the divination is successful, you can leave with the scepter of prophecy. As for the others, they are not included in this transaction. Alice's smile froze, and her expression turned solemn once more. My lord, they are my companions. I hope to be able to take them with me. Hee, little one, don't make such unreasonable demands. This is just a fair trade. You give me information, and I give you the scepter. You have no right to bargain with me. My lord, little one, don't think that you can use this to blackmail me. There are many people in this world who have mastered divination. I can send people to capture them all. As for why I chose you, the only reason is your identity as a sorcerer. You sorcerers have always been selfish, and your mind is very flexible when doing business. You don't have those disgusting rules and restrictions when negotiating. So, little one, don't waste my patience. My lord, what if I give up the scepter of prophecy as payment? The majestic voice was silent for a moment, and finally replied, If you give up the scepter of prophecy, then you can take your sorcerer companions with you. Also, I can agree to another small request of yours. Alice's lips curled up slightly, and her face showed a trace of regret. 3 days later, Grim, Alice, Ulthar, and Mary successfully left the Scar of Death and returned to the giant floating ship. However, as soon as they stepped on the ship, Alice fainted inexplicably and lost consciousness. After a joint examination by a few witches of destiny, they finally came to a terrible conclusion. Alice's life was about to run out. This trip to the underground seemed to have consumed a large amount of Alice's life force, and all her bodily functions were on the verge of collapse. According to her current physical condition, Alice only had about 2 months to live. Before that, Alice's life force should be able to last at least 40 years. When Alice woke up again, it was already nightfall. The giant floating ship slowly floated above the high clouds. Through the porthole, she could see pieces of broken clouds flying past the sides of the ship. There were no lights in the cabin. Only the flickering moonlight shone in, faintly illuminating the burly figure in front of the bed. Grimm's strong facial features were very three-dimensional, and the dim light cast deep shadows on his face. As soon as Alice opened her eyes, she saw a pair of bright eyes hidden in the shadows. "You've lost 40 years of life," Grimm sighed faintly. Alice's pale face rested on the pure, white pillow. Her face was even paler than a piece of white cloth. "Don't worry about me." Alice forced a smile. Her silky long hair had turned silver at this moment. "I can at least live for a while. This period of time is enough for us to do something." 2 months, Grimm replied resolutely. 2 months is already a long time. Don't you have confidence in me? Grimm hesitated for a moment, and finally asked doubtfully, "What exactly did you experience after we were captured underground?" Alice reclined on the pillow and softly recounted her experience in the magic hall. "Then, what did that mysterious expert want you to divine for him?" Grimm could not help but ask curiously. Alice lightly tapped her forehead and shook her head with a bitter smile. "After the divination was successful, that guy used a spell to erase part of my memory. That's why even I can't remember what the divination was about. That despicable guy actually touched your memory. If he's so capable, why didn't he learn divination by himself, and instead asked a little witch like you to do it?" Grimm muttered indignantly. Alice smiled faintly. "Perhaps it has something to do with his original attribute. The power of destiny has always been against dark energy. So, if he was a high-grade undead, then his luck would always be locked in a negative state, and any divination spells would be useless against him. Ahem, I know what you're saying, but I still feel angry. You've lost so many years of life for nothing. You've grown up. I'm not really accompanying you." Alice smiled coldly. "Don't forget that Lord has agreed to a small request of mine." "Oh, what did you request?" "I asked him to send troops to harass the forest elves a little." Grimm was speechless for a while. After going around the underground world, he knew very well how terrifying the undead were. If thousands of undead swarmed to the surface, it would bring a disaster to the forest elves that was even more terrifying than the witch disaster. The Scar of Death. The elf station near the Scar of Death continued to send troops down to search for Lord Antoril. However, just as they were busy, a strange mist floated up from the depths of the ground and enveloped the Scar of Death and the surrounding illusory magic forest. In the fog, a series of hoarse howls and noisy and dense friction sounds could be heard. Along with the night wind, a putrid, rotten smell filled the entire world. Groups of zombies and skeletons crawled out from the depths of the ground, and with slow steps, they moved towards the nearby elven stronghold. Behind them, large groups of white ghouls crawled out of the deep trenches, and under the command of some middle-grade undead, they pounced towards the nearest elven city. From time to time, one could even see the blood monsters, Dabo zombies, iron zombies, wraiths, skeleton mages, and corpse demons among their ranks. And without exception, they had all been ordered to kill all elves by the ruler behind them. Chapter 696. Something happened. Something big happened. The forest elves, who had always prided themselves on being peace-loving and worshipping nature, were in big trouble. For some reason, a group of hundreds of thousands of terrifying undead swarmed out of the Scar of Death, a forbidden area in the center of the Callan continent. They slaughtered their way to the nearest elven city, Rem's City. Wherever they went, all living things withered and all life was extinguished. All the forest beasts and powerful magical beasts were annihilated. In order to protect their homes and territories, some of the more powerful magical beasts risked their lives to fight against the undead. However, faced with the tide-like undead creatures, as well as the evil undead spellcasters hiding within the corpse tide, the magical beast lords could only end up with their bodies and souls destroyed. As the masters of the Callan continent, the forest elves would not allow a group of foreign villains to trample on their homeland. Therefore, the elven royal court, which had been silent for a long time, immediately mobilized a large number of elite troops from the Central Mountains. They traveled day and night to Rem's city, hoping to stop the vanguard of the undead tide. When the local elven villages heard the news, they arranged for a large-scale relocation of the villagers. They also gathered their men and began to snipe the undead creatures that were scattered throughout the magic forest. In an instant, the flames of war were ignited everywhere in the magic forest, and a large-scale riot was about to break out. However, just as the undead calamity was about to break out, a strange figure suddenly appeared in the sky above the Scar of Death. It was an illusory soul shadow. The entire soul shadow was wrapped in a layer of brilliant golden light. The light made it difficult for people to see through it. They could only vaguely see that it was a woman through the blinding golden light. However, the existence of this soul shadow was obviously very unusual. It contained a strange divine aura, so it also gave her some extraordinary and mystical abilities. At least, for the decaying corpses in front of her, they did not have the ability to see through her existence. Therefore, this soul shadow leisurely strolled in the bustling tide of corpses. No matter how the other side staggered and pushed past her, none of the undead could detect her presence. Even the level 1 and 2 undead creatures were the same. She first looked down at the scale and progress of the zombie tide from the sky above the Scar of Death. The her in the shadow was immediately filled with rage as she dived down into the terrifying trench where the aura of death was churning. The swarming specters along the way were nothing to her. Her soul shadow kept going down, passing through countless tunnels and caves that were full of stinky, ugly zombies, skeletons, and ghouls, until she reached a mysterious area almost 1,000 meters below the ground. If the area outside was still shrouded in a thin layer of death chi, then in here, the entire space was as dense as ink. Even with her divine vision, she could not see through this layer of death space to see the secrets and arrangements inside. "Please stop, Lady Silsa." A strange crystal skull floated out from the inside and stood in front of the soul shadow. From the looks of it, this crystal skull belonged to Luke, the Grade 4 basic lich who had captured Antorier and Ulthar in one fell swoop. However, at this moment, it was respectfully paying respect to a soul shadow whose figure and face could not be seen clearly. At this point, there was no need to hide anything. Hence, the golden light dissipated, revealing the graceful and perfect figure of the elven goddess Silsa. As the elven goddess, Silsa naturally had all the advantages and beauty of the forest elves. She had short green hair, long and soft-pointed ears, a straight nose bridge, green eyes, and a perfect figure that would make anyone gasp in amazement. As this was only a manifestation of her divine will, there were no weapons or defensive equipment on the Phantom. Instead, it was only wrapped in a beautiful, light, and soft robe. Lich Luke carefully raised a dead soul barrier to block the golden radiance's shockwaves. Although he was a Grade 4 Lich, which was already one of the top forces in the planar world, he was facing a true god. Even though he had always been cold and arrogant, he did not dare to be too rude in front of a powerful god, even if it was just a divine incarnation of that god. "Lich, call your master out. I have something to say to him." Silsa frowned and said with a look of disgust. Although the power that she brought with her was less than 1/10,000th of her main body, it would be difficult for her to deal with this small lich. However, due to the disgust of undead creatures in her soul, she still could not treat him kindly. "Please wait a moment," Lich Luke said faintly, before closing his eyes and not saying another word. From the looks of it, he seemed to be talking to someone in the distance. A moment later, as a majestic consciousness descended, Lich Luke's eyes suddenly lit up. Two balls of soul flames that were tens of thousands of times stronger than before burned fiercely in his empty eye sockets. The red radiance so strong that even Silsa's divine power could not bear it. Blight Caller, you've crossed the line. Kakik. I was wondering who was calling me, so it's you. Silsa, little girl, why have you suddenly come to my territory? Lich Luke, who had been respectful to the elven goddess just a moment ago, suddenly changed his attitude. Not only did he become incomparably arrogant, but he even changed the way he addressed Silsa. Blight Caller, don't even think about changing the topic. The contract we signed last time still exists. Are you unilaterally tearing it up and starting a new war? Even Silsa, the elven goddess, felt a bit of a headache towards this powerhouse from another world who had caused such a great disaster to the Kalan continent. Kakik, how is that possible? You gathered the over-gods of the three major pantheons to force me to sign that peace treaty. If I had violated the agreement, would my spiritual consciousness still be able to appear here? Luke sneered, his voice full of hatred. Then what is this behavior of yours? Silsa was also starting to get angry. Your subordinates have already rushed out of the Scar of Death and are attacking my people. Isn't that tearing up the treaty? Ha! Silsa, little girl, are you still wondering why my subordinates rushed out of the Scar of Death, while I was not punished by the treaty? You must have used some tricks to bypass the Overgod's treaty. Now, summon your subordinates immediately, or I will start another divine war against you. It's useless, Silsa. Luke laughed maniacally. It's useless even if you summon the ocean overgod and the human overgod this time. It's not me who violated the treaty this time. It's you. You. Nonsense. I've been restraining my subordinates, and no high elves have ever entered the Scar of Death to disturb you. You. Just as Sylvia's cheeks flushed with anger, Lich Luke gently tapped his upper and lower jaw together, and a fixed teleportation gate opened. A humanoid figure wrapped in layers of deathly aura floated out of it, unable to move at all. Looking at his hair, his clothes, and the natural light that filled his entire soul, Silsa's heart suddenly sank for no reason. It was a Grade 3 druid. Among the forest elves, Grade 3 druids were usually born in prominent elven families and belonged to the category of high elves. How about it, Silsa? Do you dare not admit that he's your believer? He really has the guts to barge into my territory and kill countless slaves that I've painstakingly nurtured. So, since you forest elves took the initiative to attack me, it's completely in line with the agreement that I sent some slaves to fight back. Silsa's expression became cold and solemn. Although she knew that Luke wasn't telling the truth and that there had to be some twists and turns in his words, she had used divine spells to verify that Luke's words had been approved by the plane's consciousness. This also meant that although the plane's consciousness hated this evil invader, according to the laws of the plane and the Overgod's treaty, it couldn't go against its own rules and side with the elves. Without the plane's suppression, the forest elves would have to face this evil, blighted one alone. Even with Silsa's power as the elven Overgod, she would have to be somewhat afraid of him. Blighted one, I'll investigate what you've said. But before I get the results of my investigation, hand over my believers first, and then call back your corpse-tied army. If we really did violate the agreement, I promise in the name of the elven Overgod that we will give you satisfactory compensation. Faced with this witness, even the elven Overgod Silsa didn't dare to ignore it. You can investigate if you want, but don't even think about taking away the evidence in my hands. Since you've already promised, I won't send any more troops. As for the undead that I've already sent out, I won't take them back for now. Let them roam around your territory for a few days. When you've given me satisfactory compensation, you can come and talk to me about withdrawing. With that, the strange and powerful existence's consciousness retracted and disappeared on the spot. Lich Luke's soul fire that had been as bright as the sun suddenly dimmed. If one looked closely, they would find that Luke's soul fire was even weaker and dimmer than before the powerful consciousness descended. From this, it could be seen that simply carrying the powerful existence's consciousness had already exhausted this elementary level 4 Lich. However, at this moment, Silsa wasn't in the mood to care about a lich. She glanced at the grade 3 druid Antoro with a complicated gaze and finally shook her head and left. Although the powerful existence's consciousness had already left, and although there was only a tired grade 4 lich guarding the scene, this grade 6 elven overgod still didn't dare to forcibly take away his believers. Chapter 697. The things that were hidden behind the scenes were naturally unknown to the mortals of the world. Even the great gods who stood at the peak of the world could only lower their heads in the face of greater power, silently enduring all the humiliation and torture. If the gods were like that, then the mortals at the bottom of the hierarchy would undoubtedly be even more miserable and miserable. With the interference of the elven god Silsa, the scar of death no longer sent out undead. However, the undead that had entered the magic forest had reached an astonishing number of millions. These undead did not have the slightest intention of retreating or staying put. Under the command of the mid to high grade undead hidden among them, they gathered into a terrifying wave of zombies and rushed towards the nearest elven city, Rem City. As the main body of the zombie wave was made up of stiff zombies and skeletons, their movement speed was not fast. This gave the forest beasts, magical beasts, and elven civilians the opportunity to quickly retreat. However, the zombie wave was not just made up of these low-level creatures. There were also some fast and terrifying ghouls, as well as a variety of mid to high-grade undead. They suddenly came from the empty underground space to this illusory magic forest that was rich in flora and fauna resources. They were immediately unable to restrain the thirst of their soul source for warm flesh and blood. They began to break away from the corpse-tide army and began to slaughter and loot everywhere in the illusory magic forest. The entire zombie wave army was like an expanding hydra with different heads sticking out. As it approached Rem City, it constantly showed its sharp fangs to the surrounding forest. Almost every moment, there would be dozens or even hundreds of battles breaking out in the forest around the zombie wave army. Some are provoked by the elves, some by the undead spellcasters, and some are triggered randomly. No matter who started the battle, there was no way out for the participants. There was no other solution except to fight to the death. To the powerful undead that was hiding behind the scenes, these millions of cannon fodder were nothing in its hands. If they could be used to exchange for a small increase in the strength of some undead elites, everything would be worth it. As for the elves, the back-and-forth negotiations behind the scenes were still going on. If the elves could fight fiercely and not give the undead too many chances, their goddess Silsa would have more confidence in the negotiations. One of them liked to trade quantity for quality, while the other had his own difficulties. It was precisely because of these overt and covert reasons that led to a life-and-death battle between the undead and the elves when they met. From the Scar of Death to Rem City, the scene of bloody battles could be seen almost everywhere. Moreover, the number of individuals that died within was uncountable. This was the first time that the illusory magic forest, which had always been tranquil and peaceful, had suffered such painful torture and trampling. Even though they were high up in the sky, everything that was happening in the illusory forest did not escape the senses of Grimm and the others. Facing such a ferocious wave of zombies, Grimm could not help but feel shocked by the masterminds behind the scenes, even if they were not on his side. To those super experts, this might just be a boring game. But in a mid-level plane, it was already a huge move that could overturn the structure of the entire plane. Moreover, through Alice's simple description, Grimm was able to analyze the cause of the current situation and the direction of the future development better than anyone else. To be honest, the elves were able to survive this disaster because of Grimm and the others. If the elven goddess Silsa had the time, she would not mind coming over personally to purify these evil wizards. So, if they wanted to do something, now was undoubtedly the best time to do so. With blessings, the giant floating ship carried Grimm and the others and circled around the area where the two sides were fighting for a long time. Only when they saw the huge group of dragons breaking through the sky did they choose to sail away and go around the central mountain range from another direction. The Kalan continent was now in chaos because of them, with such a huge wave of zombies wreaking havoc. The Elven Coalition army on the south coast was also in a tense standoff with the Pale Witches. Although they had mobilized some of their manpower, it was still difficult to stop the tentacles of the zombie wave. They had no choice. The elite army that guarded the central mountain range all year round, responsible for guarding the Elven Palace, the Elven Temple, and the mysterious Forbidden Land, had been mobilized and rushed to Rem's city day and night. For a moment, the forces of the central mountain range were unprecedentedly weak. But this weakness was also relative. After all, there were no weak elves or magical beasts that could stand tall in the central mountain range. The Pegasus Spring that could breed magical Pegasi, the Moonlight Woodland that could give birth to holy unicorns, the Deadwood Arch that could turn adult dryads into treant warriors, and the Dragon Cliff that was specially built for the forest dragons. Even without the elite army sent by the Elven Palace, these mysterious forbidden lands would not easily encounter any danger. This was because each forbidden land would be guarded by a specific race's powerhouse all year round. For example, the Pegasus Spring that the Dark Witches coveted for a long time was the highest holy land of the Pegasi race. The Pegasus Spring was located at the southern foot of the Central Mountain Range, where there was a green grassland that stretched for hundreds of miles. It was thanks to the elves' dedicated maintenance that the illusory magic forest didn't cover the entire highland grassland with dense green leaves that couldn't see the light of day. On this vast grassland, there were nearly 1,000 groups of wild horses of different sizes. Every year, there would be tens of mutated white horses being born here. Only these mutated white horses had the right to walk into the center of the grassland, bathe in the Pegasus Spring, and evolve into magical Pegasi with wings on their backs. According to the agreement between the Pegasi race and the forest elves, the elves were only allowed to send a certain number of knights into the grassland to find their own mounts on the day of the Pegasi's birth. There was no coercion, no plundering. All the elven knights had to rely on their own spirit and faith to attract and reform a newly born Pegasus. Only then would they have the right to become Pegasi knights that soared in the blue sky. The elven army sent by the Elven Palace could only guard the periphery of the grassland, protecting the peace of the wild horses. In the inner part of the grassland, the magic spring was guarded by a group of powerful Pegasi all year round. The so-called Pegasi was actually an advanced form of the silver Pegasi. From their appearance, they looked like a combination of Pegasi and unicorns. According to the Pegasi race's classification, a normal Pegasus was equivalent to a high-level acolyte or a quasi-wizard in the Magus world. The Silver Pegasus was a rank 1 extraordinary creature. The Pegasus, on the other hand, was a rank 2 magical beast. As for the Pegasus race's one and only Pegasus King, it was the only rank 3 creature in the race. Although the sorcerers divided the sorcerers into 9 levels according to the strength of the system. However, not every species could reach such a terrifying level. Take the Pegasus, for example. Rank 3 was the highest rank a Pegasus could reach in their lifetime. If they wanted to take another step forward, with their weak bodies, they would not be able to bear the burden of a stronger and greater power. Hence, the Pegasus Magic Spring was guarded by a rank 3 Pegasus King, 17 rank 2 Pegasi, and hundreds of rank 1 Silver Pegasi. If it was just them, the Dark Witches and the Destiny Witches, the Crimson Family, and the Floating Warship will be enough to take down the Pegasus Magic Spring. However, if the witches attacked the spring and displayed a strength that exceeded the Pegasus race's capabilities, the Pegasus King would not hesitate to summon the elven army around it. It would take the elite elven army less than half an hour to reach the spring from a distance of less than 100 miles. Hence, if the Dark Witches wanted to gain something from the Pegasus Magic Spring, their actions had to be firm, and the battle could not be dragged on for too long. If it was any other creature, it would be extremely difficult to achieve this. However, for the Magi who had mastered a lot of knowledge, this was obviously very easy. Forcing their way in, fighting their way from the edge of the green plains to the Pegasus magic spring, fighting a bloody battle, and finally escaping with a Pyrrhic victory. Magi would never stoop to such a scenario. Magi were publicly recognized as the most evil and selfish intelligent creatures in the entire universe. They did not rely on brute force, but on their brains and evil use of all kinds of knowledge. When the giant floating ship quietly approached the Pegasus magic spring, the witches in the ship's cabin began to work diligently. They were not preparing for battle, but for an unprecedentedly evil witchcraft ceremony. After 2 to 3 months of long preparation, the Magi had already used the Pegasi and silver Pegasi they had captured to decipher the secrets of the Pegasus race's body structure. Now, with the help of the black winged insects raised by the Dark Witches, as well as the voodoo doll created by Grimm and Ender, the poison centipede, the witchcraft ceremony's power was even more unimaginable. There was no intention of descending the floating warship. The whole witchcraft ceremony was carried out 5,000 meters above the Pegasus magic spring. Considering that the existence of the north wind at high altitudes was not conducive to the spread of witchcraft, the floating warship only slowly descended under Grimm's command when the witchcraft ceremony reached its final stage. When the floating warship descended to below 1,000 meters, it was almost exposed to the Pegasus vision. As the spaceship slowly descended, large clouds of black smoke gushed out of the cabin. The black smoke seemed to have a mind of its own. It was not blown away by the strong north wind at high altitudes. Instead, it gathered together and flew toward the lake-like Pegasus magic spring. Chapter 698. As a secluded holy land, the Pegasus race knew almost nothing about what had happened on the Callan continent recently. Perhaps in another 3 to 5 years, as the Pegasi and silver Pegasi that served in the Elven army returned to the grassland to reproduce, news of what had happened outside would spread within the Pegasus race for a short period of time. The Witch Calamity and the Undead Calamity were major events that could shake the entire continent, but to the Elven vassal races, they were nothing more than fun and jokes to relieve boredom in their spare time. Therefore, when this giant floating ship, which was enough to make all the elves pale, descended from the sky with thick black smoke, the Pegasi responsible for guarding the magic spring didn't scatter. Instead, they angrily formed a battle formation and flew into the sky to resist. It had to be said that these Pegasi were simply too ignorant as native flying magical beasts of the Callan continent. Although the higher tier ones among them were quite intelligent, they were still far from intelligent races overall. Under the protection of the elves, they lived too comfortably and had already lost the sense of danger that a magical beast should have. Faced with a colossus that had openly invaded their holy land, the Pegasi guarding the demonic spring gathered together and formed a majestic group of Pegasi that flew in the sky. They circled above the demonic spring, ready to attack at any time. But just as they were about to defend their holy land with force, something happened to the Pegasi group above the magic spring. A strange floral fragrance wafted out from the black smoke. The fragrance was abnormally strong, and it spread extremely quickly. After smelling this floral fragrance, the middle and high-level Pegasi only felt dizzy for a moment before recovering. However, the ordinary Pegasi, which made up the majority of the Pegasi group, couldn't hold on any longer. Splash! As the first Pegasus plunged into the demonic spring lake, the rest of the group of Pegasi fell from the sky like dumplings falling into a pot. The entire Pegasus group immediately fell into chaos. Compared to ordinary magical beasts, Pegasi were called magical beasts, but they didn't have any long-range attack skills. Apart from a pair of wide wings on their back that allowed them to fly extremely fast, there wasn't anything else special about them. In order to attack the enemy, the Pegasi still relied on flying and pouncing. It had to be said that without their riders, the Pegasi's threat to the Magi was reduced by half. The poison centipede Ender descended from the sky with a simple and unadorned lampstand in his hand. There was a lit white candle on top of the lampstand. The rich and lingering aroma was emitted from the candles. Many dark witches, fate witches, and crimson witches surrounded her, carefully protecting her in the middle of the crowd. Meanwhile, in the periphery, Grim, Mary, Tigula, and Zacha, the Tier 2 players, each found a target and pounced on the enemy. As for the Tier 3 Dark Witch, Ulthar, she turned into a cloud of black smoke and charged toward the Pegasus King. After a long period of preparation and brewing, the Magi had already developed this extremely powerful and unique witchcraft based on the biological characteristics and physiological structure of the Pegasus. All the Pegasi within the range of the witchcraft aura would be greatly affected. The high-grade Pegasi might be able to withstand it for a while with their physique, but the low-grade Pegasi would immediately fall asleep upon smelling the intoxicating fragrance. This way, the Magi team was successfully prevented from being surrounded by a large group of Pegasi. Thus, as the Magi team rushed down from the floating ship, large groups of Pegasi fell from the sky one after another, plunging into the Pegasus magic spring that was half a mile in circumference below, never to be seen again. The high-grade Pegasi swayed and flapped their wings with all their might, engaging in a chaotic battle with the Magi. Due to the lack of time, they did not have the time to slowly deal with these Pegasi. Thus, the Magi attacked fiercely the moment they arrived. Dark matter transformed into small shadow snakes, ferocious flames in the shape of firebirds, oily green balls of acid, 3-meter-tall human-shaped wind elementals, and endless sonic booms. Under the control of the Magi, all sorts of berserk spells flew towards the surrounding Pegasi herd, covering the sky and covering the earth. Apart from the silver Pegasus, who could put up a strange energy barrier to block the spells, the other Pegasi could only rely on their strong bodies to withstand the attacks. After a wave of spells, more than 10 Pegasi neighed mournfully and fell from the sky, most of their bodies covered in wounds from the berserk spells. Fresh blood sprayed down, and the entire battlefield looked tragic beyond words. Even so, the Pegasi did not retreat in the face of enemies invading their holy land. They raised their necks and neighed, flapping their wide wings as they sped through the sky. Every time they gathered enough strength, they would neigh and charge at the Magi. In the sky, the sorcerers conjured colorful defensive spells one after another. However, the Pegasi did not care and crashed head-on into the translucent protective barrier. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk after the muffled sounds. The Magi's protective barrier was still intact, but the Pegasi that crashed head-on had blood all over their faces and were dizzy. However, before the Magi could adjust their postures and reap the stunned Pegasi, the second wave of Pegasi had already arrived. Relying on the continuous and rapid collisions, the Magi's protective barrier turned from translucent to bright yellow, then to pale red, and finally to a glaring blood red. Finally, under the continuous collisions of the Pegasi, one of the Dark Witch's protective barriers shattered. As if someone had sounded the horn to charge, more Pegasi swarmed over, using their ferocious collisions to separate the Dark Witch from the other Magi. At this moment, the Pegasi that had been waiting for a long time swooped down and began to trample with their sturdy iron hooves. It had to be said that the number of rank 2 Dark Witches that had come was too little. The rank 3 Ulthar and the rank 3 Pegasi King were engaged in a fierce battle in the sky, and had no time to pay attention to or protect the low-ranked Dark Witches below. Meanwhile, as soon as the lone Tier 2 Dark Witch charged into the fray and shielded her companion, another Dark Witch, a short distance away, fell victim to the Pegasus Horde's attacks. Even with the help of the witchcraft fragrance, nearly half of the low-ranked Pegasi were crippled, but the remaining Pegasi still had the absolute advantage in numbers against the Magi that had come. In every collision, the Pegasi would lose their life force, while the wizards would lose the wizard power in their bodies. In every aspect, the Magi had an overwhelming advantage over the Pegasi. However, this advantage was not enough for the Magi to escape unscathed. The first to be harmed was a Dark Witch. The Witches of Destiny and the Crimson Magi had the advantage in number of rank 2 Magi, and there were many fake rank 2 Magi. Thus, when their own people were surrounded, there would be people who would come to their rescue. However, the Dark Witch only had one rank 2 magi. Even if she saved one, she wouldn't be able to save the other. Therefore, while she was struggling to put out the fire, a Dark Witch's shield finally broke, and when she turned into a shadow to escape, she was trampled to death by 2 Pegasi that swooped down on her. Of course, this Dark Witch was not truly dead. Due to the special ability of her race, her soul would automatically return to the soul energy pool within the wizard's pagoda on the Dark Island. If she was given a month or 2, she would be able to create a new body of shadow for herself and revive. However, judging from the time, she would not have the chance to participate in this interdimensional battle. Furthermore, the soul energy pool could only recall her soul, but it could not recall her wizard equipment. Thus, the Dark Witches would not be willing to return to the rear naked and abandon the wizard equipment they had painstakingly accumulated on the battlefield unless they had no other choice. After the Dark Witch, the next to suffer was the 3-headed magic hound Anguja that was guarding the wind wizard Desira. As an external force of the Crimson family, the 3-headed magic hound Anguja was forced to bring a few of his subordinates to participate in this interdimensional battle. After a few rounds of killing and battles, the 5 demon hounds he brought with him had all died gloriously. This time it was his turn. Due to a mistake in his positioning, the 3-headed magic hound Anguja, who could spit out 3 offensive wizard spells at the same time, was targeted by a level 2 Pegasus. It could not be helped, as the official Crimson Magi had gathered to protect the poison centipede, Indo. Anguja, who was all alone, became the best target to attack. Faced with the sudden attack of the level 2 Pegasus, the frightened Anguja began to flee in all directions in the sky. As he fled, he let out a mournful bark, hoping that his companions in the battle not far away would rush over to rescue him. Unfortunately, one of the Blood Knights that Mary sent out was entangled by another Pegasus. Zacha the Dragon Man didn't know how to fly, and he had to rely on a magic wand of flight to fight drunkenly in the sky. At this speed, he would not be able to rescue him in time. Thus, it was no surprise that the enraged Anguja, who had nowhere else to go, was crushed by the enraged Pegasus. Then, the Pegasus stomped on his head. This fellow had always been half-hearted after following Grimm, and regrettably became a pile of disgusting bloody paste in the otherworld battlefield that was difficult for outsiders to recognize. The next to suffer were the few new level 1 vampires that Mary had taken in. With their strength, it was difficult for them to participate in such a battle. If they were not careful, they would be crushed and stomped on by the flock of Pegasus, turning into a pile of mush. However, the Pegasus could only wreak havoc to this extent. Chapter 699. Ash, ash, ash with a mournful neigh. The majestic Pegasus King fell from the sky, its body covered in black smoke. As it fell, its body sizzled with a strange corrosive sound. Everyone on the battlefield could see clearly that the Pegasus King was done for. Even if the battle was already over and they would only be slaughtered if they stayed, the remaining Pegasi would still fight to the death. They were not fighting, but stalling for time. As long as they could drag the battle until the Elven army arrived, the enemies would retreat without a fight. Even if they were all sacrificed, they could still preserve the magic spring that the Pegasus tribe needed. Their idea was simple and beautiful. However, using it against wizards was an overestimation of their own strength. Since the Pegasus King was gone, the rank 3 Dark Witch Ulthar became the unstoppable blade of the battlefield. Although Ulthar was slightly injured in the fight with the Pegasus King, she was motivated by the prospect of victory. She gathered Grimm and the rest of the Grade 2 Pegasus and began to eliminate the remaining Grade 2 Pegasus in the sky. With a rank 3 witch in charge of suppressing and restraining the Pegasi that were targeted by Ulthar could not escape no matter how fast they flew. Ulthar trapped the Pegasi in place with a dark cage. Grimm commanded Draconian Zacha and Tigul's Goblin Ripper to surround them. Even if the Pegasi had a strong physique, they could not fight in close combat with these 2 big guys. Thus, the Pegasi were captured alive and knocked unconscious, then sent to the floating airship one by one. By this time, 22 minutes had passed since the battle started. When there were only a few Pegasi left in the sky, Ulthar hurriedly brought a few dark witches down to the center of the magic spring. There, a stone Pegasus statue stood in the middle of the lake, its front hooves raised high and its wings spread. And the gurgling spring water was coming from the mouth of the stone horse statue to the dark witches. The magic spring's water wasn't important. What was important was the stone Pegasus statue. If they simply broke off the base of the stone Pegasus statue and took it away, it would be a waste of God's gift. It might even backfire and destroy the magical power of the strange statue. Therefore, if he wanted to take it away in one piece, he would have to use a complete sealing technique. If Ulthar wanted to do that, she could not be disturbed by the outside world. When that happened, she would lose her ability to sense the outside world. If they really encountered danger, they could only rely on Grimm and the others to protect them. Nodding at Grimm, Dark Witch Ulthar led the other 3 dark witches into the magic spring. They had to find out what was so special about the stone Pegasus statue as soon as possible and seal it completely. As for the Tier 2 Dark Witch, she landed on the stone Pegasus back and closed her eyes to focus on defending the stone Pegasus. Grimm and Mary gave some simple instructions and left Zacha, Tigula, the wizards, and the vampires here. Without hesitation, the 2 of them flew in the direction of the elven garrison. Mary and Grimm were both Tier 2 now, but their combat styles were completely different. Even though they were rushing, they each had their own distinct characteristics. Mary's bat wings spread out halfway, and her entire body was like a dragonfly gliding through the air. She was less than 3 meters above the ground. Wherever she passed, she left a faint, dark red trail of blood that only faded after a long time. Grimm, on the other hand, did not choose to fly. He was a typical fire wizard, and his mastery of flying could never be compared to other wizards. Hence, he took a different approach. Using his expertise in flame leap and flame transformation as a foundation, he came up with this method of traveling. During the cooldown period of flame jump, his entire body turned into a ball of invisible flames that hovered half a meter above the ground. He used the high-temperature flames to rapidly advance. When Flame Jump's cooldown period was over, the ball of flames suddenly exploded into a ring of fire that slowly spread out. Then, it suddenly appeared at the end of one's line of sight and continued to shoot forward. Just like that, flame jump, flame jump, flame jump, flame jump again. His speed wasn't much slower than Mary's as he repeated the same process. However, the traces left behind by this method were too obvious. If someone were to look down from the sky, they would be able to clearly see a string of black pearls on the path that Grimm had taken. The pearls were circular scorch marks left behind by the leaping flames, while the streams of flames burned a ghastly path of ashes on the green grassland. Grimm and Mary also met the elven army that was rushing to support them 30 miles away from the Pegasus Spring. It was obvious that in order to increase their speed, they had abandoned the slow infantry, so the reinforcements that Grimm met were almost all aerial cavalry. Leading them was a beautiful elf riding on a Grade 2 green dragon. Grimm stepped out from a pillar of flames that shot up to the sky. The huge flames condensed into a strange flame giant that was 5 meters tall, blocking the path of the elves. Grimm used his strange vision to look around, and finally nodded in satisfaction. Very good. No Grade 3 powerhouses before they arrived. They had investigated the elven army stationed around the Pegasus Spring and found that there were no Grade 3 powerhouses among them. However, they were still worried that the Elven Kingdom would be alerted and send more high-ranked elves here. Hence, the first thing Grimm did was to search for the existence of Grade 3 powerhouses. Since there were no Grade 3 powerhouses, today's battle would be difficult. If there were, Grimm would not be so foolish as to risk his life for the Dark Witches. Of course, he would run as far as he could. He would not risk his life to test the strength of a Grade 3 elf. Even if the Grade 3 elves were weak, that was only relative to a Grade 3 wizard. Taking care of a rank 2 magus was not a problem at all. Therefore, when he blocked the way and looked around, not seeing any grade 3 elf powerhouses, Grim immediately grew bolder. Leave the green dragon and the little elf girl to me. The rest are yours. Without any hesitation, Grim assigned the enemies in front of him with just a few words. Although Mary's short-range flying speed was shocking, against a fellow with thick skin and long-range attacks like the green dragon, her weak attack power was obvious. That was why Grim seemed to be unfair. He only assigned 2 elven air riders to himself and gave the remaining 100 elven air riders to Mary. However, in reality, it was a decision made according to the characteristics of each individual's battle. Mary was naturally aware of this. She giggled and suddenly turned into a red cloud, flying into the midst of the enemies. Careful, over there, quick, hide. For a moment, cries of pain rose and fell from the group of elves. The elves who had been hurrying along finally realized that these 2 strange wizards had come to ambush them. You two are my... Due to his body size, Grim's voice was muffled. The green dragon that Grim pointed at and the beautiful female elf on its back changed their expressions at the same time. Their faces were filled with shame and resentment. You're courting death. The beautiful female elf stretched out her slender arms, grabbing the strange elven longbow on her back. Elidra, let's teach him a lesson. The berserk green dragon raised its neck and roared. It flapped its powerful wings and swooped down. The combination of an elven archer and a green dragon. Grim's huge eyes suddenly narrowed and fell on the strange elven longbow in the female elf's hand. Truth be told, the green dragon and the female elf had given him a heavy mental pressure. But to be honest, the mental pressure from the 2 of them combined couldn't compare to the pressure from the longbow in the female elf's hand. When the beautiful female elf sat on the green dragon's back and knocked an arrow, Grim felt a chill in his heart. Even though they were 200 meters apart, he could still feel the heavy pressure from the elven longbow that had yet to be fired. In Grim's mind, the AI chip quickly determined the other party's identity based on the energy undulations from the elven longbow. Beep. Warning, warning. High energy fusion weapon detected. Form bow. Attack methods. Energy molding, energy compression, energy strengthening. Additional attack effects. Chaotic teleportation attack. Base attack strength, 200 to 300 degrees. Note, according to the laws of Fane Plane, this weapon may be labeled as a demigod weapon. Demigod weapon? Even Grim's heart couldn't help but tremble when he heard this word that he hadn't heard for a long time. The scepter of prophecy that Alice could not forget seemed to be a demigod weapon, and this rank 2 elf who had appeared out of nowhere was also holding a demigod weapon. Damn it, aren't there a little too many demigod weapons in this plane? In the sorcerer world, sorcerers categorize the sorcerer tools into rank 1 sorcerer tools, rank 2 sorcerer tools, rank 3 sorcerer tools, and rank 4 sorcerer tools. The so-called demigod weapons of Fane Plane were on par with rank 4 magic weapons. In the Magus world, however, rank 4 magic weapons would never fall into the hands of low-ranked magi. Even if a low-ranked magus obtained a high-ranked magic weapon through marriage, they would not be able to keep it for a long period of time. Instead, it would bring disaster upon themselves. However, in the Fane Plane, the existence of gods meant that the chances of obtaining high-ranked weapons were much higher than in the Magus world. Worshippers who were doted on by the gods could be rewarded by them for various reasons. Chapter 700. When it came to magic equipment, Grim's was rather shabby. The only thing he had was the soul equipment, the scroll of voodoo. However, the scroll had already evolved into the body of the voodoo doll. After being nurtured for so long, the voodoo doll's basic strength had risen to advanced grade 1, which could help Grim out a little. The stitching puppet, on the other hand, only had the strength of intermediate grade 1 after continuous slaughter and devouring. It did not even have the chance to fight against advanced grade 2 opponents. Apart from that, Grim's equipment was only advanced grade 1, with the exception of his Inferno Destruction Wizard staff, which could barely be considered advanced grade 2 equipment. These outdated equipment were no longer worthy of his current status, and they could not provide him with much assistance in battle. If not for Grimm's powerful elemental puppet, it would have been difficult for him to gain such an advantage in a battle of the same rank. That was why when Grimm saw a quasi-divine weapon in the hands of a young Grade 2 elf, he couldn't help but be envious even with his calm demeanor. As the green dragon swooped down, it opened its mouth wide, and a 2-meter-wide acid breath swept toward Grimm in the shape of a fan. On the other hand, the beautiful female elf on the green dragon's back flicked her fingers, and 2 transparent wind arrows caught up to the acid breath at a speed undetectable to the naked eye, stabbing towards Grimm's chest. Beep. Warning. Grade 2 green dragon's acid breath. Estimated strength, 170 degrees. Has a corrosive effect of 100 degrees. Proficient at corroding magic shields. Estimated threat level is high. Please evade. Wind arrow elemental attack. Estimated strength, 150 degrees. Low threat level. With the AI chip's instantaneous scan, Grimm quickly grasped the strength of the 2 attacks. The green dragon was a Tier 2 magic creature, and a casual spit from its mouth could deal around 270 degrees of acid damage. However, the female elf archer's demigod equipment only had a range of 150 degrees. This was out of Grimm's expectations. Of course, the communication between their consciousnesses was extremely fast, and it only took Grimm an instant to analyze the situation of the battle. At the moment when the 2 attacks were about to hit him, Grimm, who had transformed into a huge burning man, smirked and exploded into a ring of fire. Grimm took the opportunity to jump out. However, as soon as he emerged from a new area, before he could clearly see the situation around him, a sudden alarm already filled his ears. Beep. Warning. Planar law fluctuations detected. Source of fluctuations. Wind arrow. Unfortunately, the warning came too late. With 2 muffled sounds, 2 wind arrows pierced through Grimm's elemental body of flames, leaving 2 holes that went through the front and back of his body. The huge burning man raised his head and let out a painful roar. When he transformed into a body of flames, he indeed did not have the vital points of a human and could be immune to most physical attacks. However, the power of fire that was destroyed by the wind arrow was also a part of Grimm's current power. Although this power could be quickly replenished through the core, the lack of power was real. Why? The huge burning man turned around and roared at the female elf on the green dragon. Why did I get hurt even though I clearly dodged your attack? Looking at the almost enraged flame giant, the female elven archer proudly raised a longbow in her hand that flickered with a strange magical luster. She said proudly, "Stupid big guy, haven't you heard of the Sinsavi heart piercer? So you're Sinsavi." The flame giant, who was furious just a moment ago, was now calm, as usual. I was wondering what's so special about this longbow. Turns out it has the attribute of sure hit. If it was in the past, Grimm would definitely scoff at the effect of sure hit. How could there be such an absolute and ridiculous thing in this world? Just because you say sure hit, you'll definitely hit it? Then what's the point of dodging and technique? But as he gathered more and more knowledge about magic, Grimm was surprised to find that the so-called sure hit did make sense. First of all, this type of weapon could not be made by mortals. There had to be a god involved in it. Secondly, when the god shaped these weapons, he would incorporate a trace of his understanding of the laws of the plane and his authority. That was how he could bestow these weapons with extraordinary magical abilities. For example, sure hit, indestructible, all-conquering, as long as one had the power of laws. Even if a leaf was imbued with the power of all-conquering, it could easily break through the sturdiest magic shield in the world. This was because when the leaf collided with a magic shield, it was not the material and sturdiness of the leaf that collided, but the power of laws of both sides. As long as one's own power of laws overpowered the opponent, even a leaf in one's hand would be able to smash the magic shield into pieces. Of course, in reality, it was also a problem to find a leaf that could bear such a lofty power of laws. That was why the forest elves could casually cut off a tender branch from the great tree of life to make a magic weapon that could suppress those magical metal weapons. This was because of the power of laws of the tree of life that permeated every branch and leaf. And the elven longbow in the hands of this childish elf obviously had the property of sure hit. This way, no matter how Grim tried to dodge or block an arrow shot from the longbow, the arrow would magically appear anywhere in his body under the control of the law of sure hit. The whole process might be ridiculous, but it was a real threat to Grim. Just when Grim understood why he was injured, the young female archer with the figure of a 13 or 14-year-old girl once again rode on her green dragon and swooped down. This time, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. She actually shot 7 wind arrows in one go. Fuck, 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 fuck. For the first time, Grim couldn't help but curse crazily during the battle. Damn it, how can I dodge? Damn it, I'm gonna hit anyway. What's the point of wasting time on dodging? For a moment, even the experienced Grim was flustered by his opponent's brainless attacks and did not know how to deal with it. Seeing the 7 transparent wind arrows whistling towards him, Grim threw out a lava fireball, planning to use the explosion of the fireball to disperse the wind arrows. His body rode on the flames and jumped far away again. With a dull bang, the lava fireball exploded into a huge ball of fire. The ferocious flame shockwave and lava rained down from the sky, turning the area within 20 meters into a sea of lava. However, the moment Grim finished his flame jump, 7 wind arrows silently appeared around his flaming body and shot towards his body. This time, Grim was prepared. The flaming giant that he had transformed into opened his hand and grabbed 3 of the arrows. Unfortunately, in the next moment, he raised his head and roared angrily at the sky. Another 7 holes that were visible to the naked eye appeared on his flaming body. When he opened his hand, there was nothing between his fingers and the flames. He did not grab anything. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Those gods are a bunch of bastards. Is the power of law something a grade 2 elf should be able to grasp? Grim cursed furiously as he desperately urged the flame core to pour out a stream of pure fire energy to repair his body. Damn it, I can't just passively defend. Otherwise, this little girl can easily toy with me to death. Grim, who originally wanted to hold back, no longer dared to hold back. He threw out a huge demon puppet crystal core, which quickly turned into a terrifying flame demon surrounded by raging flames. A clumsy puppet with strange runes all over its body crawled out from Grim's arms, its body faintly emitting a sinister green radiance. A puppet made of cloth with a single eye drawn with blood appeared in the air. Its body was light as a feather, and there were 3 light spots around it that were constantly emitting shrill and eerie laughter. It had to be said that puppets and creations made by wizards were born with a trace of evil aura. Whether it was the voodoo doll or the sewing puppet, they both fit the definition of a righteous person. They were obviously not good people. Forest elves worshipped nature, so they could easily sense the bloody and murderous aura coming from these demonic puppets. The evil wizard opposite them must have slaughtered many pitiful elves in the Callan continent to be able to create them. The female elf called Sinsavi was extremely angry and immediately urged the green dragon under her to dive towards the huge flame demon. Both sides fought and retreated, gradually moving deeper into the grassland. Mary, who remained at the scene, turned into a bolt of red lightning, shuttling back and forth among the dark mass of elf aerial knights without any scruples. Wherever she passed, the low-grade elves would fall from their aerial knights like dumplings. They had already lost their lives before they even landed on the ground, and the direct cause of their deaths was that their foreheads or hearts had been pierced by Mary's bloody hands, causing terrifying bloody holes to appear on their bodies one after another. There were many level 2 elf archers who came with the team, so they naturally would not let Mary slaughter their companions without any scruples. Puff, puff, puff. Continuous sounds of arrows piercing flesh could be heard. Mary, who was freely moving among the elf aerial knights, was also accurately sniped by the enemy's arrows. Enchanted explosive arrows kept exploding on her body, and every time they exploded, a large amount of blood and flesh would burst out. But unfortunately, the delicate and charming Mary was like a humanoid demon that did not feel any pain. Not only did she not restrain herself, but she also became even more ruthless and merciless. The blood-red figure leaped and flashed in the midst of the elven aerial cavalry. Almost every flash would be accompanied by the tragic death of an elf. The number of exploding arrows she had to endure had quickly accumulated to a shocking level. Mary was crazily attacking and slaughtering. All the injuries she suffered could be recovered by killing the elves. Chapter 701. Beep. Dodge 10 meters to the left. A stream of hot flames shot out from the right side of Grimm's body, pushing the huge flame to the left for a distance. Just as the flaming humanoid moved away from its original spot, a large ball of acid with a pungent smell landed on the grassland beneath its feet, corroding the grass within a 10-meter radius into a sticky black liquid. Grimm raised his head and looked at the green dragon swooping down, and the female elf was shooting continuously. He did not waste his energy to dodge the magic wind arrows, but instead shot out countless magic fireballs, drowning his enemy in a violent storm. Roar, with a shrill roar, the majestic green dragon relied on its powerful physique to break through the area where the fireballs exploded. A pair of thick and sharp dragon claws fiercely clawed at Grimm's illusory figure that he had left behind. Then, the dragon flapped its wings wildly, sweeping up a large amount of dust and grass as it soared into the sky with the female elf on its back. The flame figure reappeared 100 meters away and coldly pulled out the magic wind arrows embedded in its body. It closed its magma hands, and with a few explosive sounds, the wind arrows finally collapsed one by one. The green dragon that soared in the sky had just locked onto the position of the tall flame figure when 3 strange ghost puppets the size of a fist appeared in the air nearby. They laughed sinisterly and rushed towards the female elf on the green dragon's back. The female elf, Sinsavi, had just used the ring of vegetation to dispel the fire poison in her body. Before she could attack the fire wizard, she was entangled by these annoying ghost puppets. Sinsavi had no choice but to shoot the 3 ghost puppets that wanted to rush in her body to plunder her soul fragments. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the giant flame figure and the terrifying Balrog worked together to create a large-scale meteor shower. The green dragon relied on its skillful flying skills to weave left and right, avoiding the fiery meteors that were falling from the sky. Only when he really couldn't avoid it would green dragon Olidri use a short, acidic breath to destroy the fire meteor. With such a powerful flying mount, the young female elf, Sinsavi, no longer had to be distracted by external disturbances. Instead, she focused all her attention on the evil fire which that moved erratically. Both of them were level 2, and he had the support of a powerful level 2 green dragon. According to Sinsavi's knowledge, he should be able to deal with this evil fire witch. But when they really fought, Sinsavi suddenly realized that the fear that the elders of the tribe had towards the evil wizards was not without reason. The difference in their understanding of combat and slaughter was as great as the difference between heaven and earth. In the minds of most elves, combat techniques were equivalent to killing methods. Pursuing battle techniques excessively meant that they had deviated from the elves' love for life and nature. They had lost their souls on the bloody path of slaughter. That was why most of the elves were unwilling to spend too much effort on combat techniques, even though they had superior archery skills that far surpassed that of ordinary races. As a result, the lethality of their archery skills was far less practical and simple than the witchcraft of the wizards who had gone through bloody battles. As a chosen that the god of archery, Marco had high hopes for, and she also possessed a semi-divine longbow that made all her clansmen envious. She could only fight evenly with the evil fire wizard. It was hard to tell who would win. This made Sinsavi, who had always been proud and arrogant, even more restless and uneasy. Both sides had already fought for more than 10 rounds on this grassland. But Grimm still hadn't found an effective way to kill the other party. Fire poison. The elf wore a ring of vegetation that could use the power of nature to remove most biological poisons. Cold flames. With the green dragon's protection, even if Grimm occasionally froze him, it would be very difficult for him to break through the green dragon's defense and kill the female elf. Flames. To be honest, this was the method that Grimm had studied the most, and it was the most powerful one. Unfortunately, with the green dragon's protection, there were only a few fire witchcraft that could threaten the female elf. As for the ghost puppets and voodoo dolls, they could distract the female elf and distract her attacks. Once they became the main attackers, they would probably be torn apart by the green dragon in minutes. It seemed that before they reached Grade 2, they would only be of limited help to Grimm. After a series of battles, the female elf was still unscathed, but Grimm and the green dragon were visibly injured. However, the wild horse herds that covered the grassland suffered the greatest losses. They had no natural enemies, no wind or rain, no drought, no hunger or thirst. As a peaceful paradise where they had lived and multiplied for generations, these wild horses had always lived a leisurely and peaceful life on the grassland. But today, all of this had been destroyed by a group of outsiders. Whether it was Grimm's fire witchcraft or the green dragon's acid breath, they were all terrifying attacks with a large area of effect and astonishing power. Any wild horse herds that were hit by the aftermath of their battle had no chance of survival. For a moment, the grassland was scorched into a piece of dry land. Charred or corroded skeletons were scattered everywhere, leaving only skin and hair. It was a sad sight to see. If not for the green dragon, Grimm would only need a quarter of an hour to deal with this arrogant young elf. He could guarantee that she would be roasted until she was burnt on the outside and raw on the inside. Unfortunately, he could only run around the grassland while enduring the pain of being pierced by the arrows. He was fighting a bitter battle with the female elf, but Mary's battle was not much easier than his. Facing so many powerful enemies, even with Mary's speed and high agility, she could not avoid being turned into a hedgehog by the elves. If it wasn't for her extraordinary lifesteal recovery ability, she would have been skinned alive by the elves even if she had a body of steel. Fortunately, they had achieved their goal. Most of the elven reinforcements had been intercepted, and less than a third of the reinforcements could enter the magic spring. When Grimm and the green dragon finally received the message that the seal had been completed, they could not help but feel relieved. They no longer bothered with the enemies here, turned around, and ran back the way they came. Of course, the angry elves would not give up. They chased after them and bombarded them. When Grimm and Mary successfully returned to the Pegasus magic spring, they found that the spring had turned blood red. Countless corpses of Pegasi and elves were floating on the surface of the not-so-big spring. The wizards who stayed here had already retreated to the giant floating ship. When Grimm grabbed Mary and rushed to the deck of the ship with a flame leap, the giant floating ship soared into the sky and began to ascend rapidly. At the same time, dozens of black cannons extended from the bottom of the giant ship, and a terrifying magic fire shot out to stop the large group of elves coming from all directions. Even with Sinsevy and the green dragon's strength, they were forced to dodge the exploding magic fire. As for the elven air riders behind them, they could not dodge in time. Their flesh and blood were blown up by the purple magic fire, and broken limbs fell from the sky like raindrops. Countless elven air riders angrily flapped their Pegasi and hippogriffs to quickly ascend, planning to fight to the death with these evil people. However, flying magic beasts were flying magic beasts after all. They could handle flying below 1,000 meters, but once they were over 1,000 meters, they could not catch up to the giant floating ship, no matter how hard they flapped their wings. Finally, as the giant airship hid within the clouds, the meaningless chase finally came to an end with the elves returning without any results. Many elves came to the Pegasus magic spring and silently looked at the stone Pegasus statue that had disappeared without a trace. Everyone's face was gloomy. The Pegasi clan who stayed behind were even more furious, but there was nothing they could do. Without the stone Pegasus statue, it meant that they had lost the magic spring's water. It was obvious what this meant for the Pegasi clan. Perhaps in less than 100 years, the once famous Pegasi clan would be completely erased from the Kalan continent. In contrast to the miserable expressions on the elves' faces, the people on the airship were in a state of joy. Having successfully completed the task given to them by their leader, the Dark Witch Ulthar was in a very relaxed and joyful mood. Even when she saw Grim again, a rare, gentle smile appeared on her usually cold and sinister face. "Kid, you did well this time. No matter what happened between us Dark Witches and you, I can make the decision to write it off. From today onwards, I can make the decision to write it off. If you're willing to develop in the North, I can also represent the leader to warmly welcome you." With Ulthar's usual indifference and disdain for wizards, the fact that she could say such words proved that Grim had gained the Tier 3 Dark Witch's respect. Ulthar's attitude was actually a recognition and praise of his own strength and the faction behind him. After being accidentally released after being captured in the underground, coupled with the help from the Pegasus Magic Spring, the Dark Witch Ulthar had unknowingly owed Grim and Alice a huge favor. Since they were willing to help so much, they must have a good reason. After thinking about it, Ulthar set her sights on the strange actions of the Destiny Witches this time. The Destiny Witches had only been revived for less than 100 years. Logically speaking, in order to train the witches in the clan, they should have chosen smaller planes that were less dangerous. But this time, they had come out in full force to this dangerous Faerun plane. Dark Witch Ulthar would never believe that there was no secret behind all this. Perhaps there was something in the Faerun plane that they were determined to obtain, or perhaps the Destiny Witches wanted to accumulate the power of destiny in the Faerun plane. No matter which it was, with the current weak strength of the Destiny Witches, it would be difficult for them to accomplish it alone. Chapter 702. When Grim brought Mary into the metal hall, Ulthar was sitting alone, carefully playing with a strange stone Pegasus statue the size of a palm. This was probably the basic form of the Pegasus magic spring after it was sealed. Even though it was completely sealed, Grim could still sense the majestic aura of mana coming from the statue through the sparkling light it emitted. The Pegasus magic spring could transform ordinary wild horses into flying magic beasts, so there had to be something special about it that was worth studying. If he brought it back and studied it thoroughly, it would definitely be of indescribable benefit to the Dark Witches when they tamed flying magic beasts. Hence, after successfully obtaining the stone statue, Ulthar's mood became unprecedentedly good. "Speak." A rare smile appeared on Ulthar's cold face. "What do you want me to do for you?" "I'll say this first. I won't participate in anything too dangerous. If worst comes to worst, I'll use resources to compensate you for your efforts." Hearing this, Grim smiled slightly. "Lord Ulthar, you don't have to worry at all. What we want you to do will definitely not be beyond your capabilities." "That's not necessarily true." Ulthar could not help but snort. "Now that the entire Kalan continent is in chaos because of you, those old fellows hiding behind the scenes are coming out one after another. At this time, if you stir up trouble in the heart of the Elven Kingdom, the chances of encountering a Grade 4 powerhouse are too high." The 2 missions for this trip had been completed one after another, so Ulthar wasn't too enthusiastic about some new adventures. After all, the Kalan continent was now filled with elven oracles and battle-class powerhouses. If he encountered a Grade 4 powerhouse with special methods, even with Ulthar's strength, he might not be able to escape. To be honest, while the Dark Witches were not afraid of powerful elven battle-class powerhouses, they were very afraid of high-grade elven oracles. If they encountered powerful elven battle-class powerhouses, even if they died in battle, the Dark Witches could still use the power pool to revive on the Dark Island. That was why they had nothing to fear, and that was why they seemed to be so rude and unbridled. However, if they died at the hands of high-grade elven oracles, the Dark Witches would only have a 45% chance of reviving. This also led to the appearance of the elven oracles, and the dark witches would often fight with restraint, no longer having their usual arrogance. Now that the heart of the Callan continent was being turned upside down by a group of undead, the elven gods couldn't stay behind the scenes. They all began to send oracles or avatars to help the elven army. In this case, if the witches showed themselves in the central part of the continent, they would be attacked by the highest level of combat power. What's more, they had just poked a giant hornet's nest and destroyed the Pegasus magic spring of the elven kingdom. For the forest elves, who had very few aerial mounts, it was like cutting off one of their legs. It would be strange if the elves didn't explode. Therefore, compared to before, Ulthar could not help but shrink back a little. However, Ulthar was still a little curious about the true goal of Grimm and the others. What was it that Alice was willing to sacrifice half of the lives of the Witches of Destiny to get it? Our target this time is a Grade 2 green dragon. There's a demigod item in its lair that we desperately need. Grimm said slowly, enunciating each word. Demi-artifact? Ulthar's eyes suddenly lit up. In the sorcerer world, only sorcerers who were rank 4 and above could grasp the laws of the plane. Most of the high-grade magic tools that they created also contained powerful laws. However, not only did it consume a lot of resources, but it also consumed the laws of the wizards themselves. Therefore, under normal circumstances, high-grade wizards would not make overly powerful artifacts for outsiders. Ulthar had been a Grade 3 Dark Witch for a long time, but she only had a Grade 3 auxiliary artifact, the Dark Pearl. It allowed her to maintain a trace of connection with the Shadow Plane, no matter what plane she was in. Because powerful artifacts were hard to find and hard to make, most wizards could only continue to use ordinary artifacts that were a grade lower than theirs. Once a wizard obtained a powerful wizard tool that was compatible with his own origin, he would immediately become one of the top wizards of the same rank and become the target of envy for all wizards. However, in the Faerun Plane, because of the existence of the gods, those who had divine force and divine authority could easily create strange artifacts with divinity. These strange items all possessed great power that did not match their own grade. Some wizards who had come into contact with divine artifacts found out that the divinity in the eyes of the gods was actually the laws of the plane passed down by the Magi. It was not as difficult for the gods to create divine artifacts and demi-artifacts as compared to high-grade Magi. That was why in the world of gods, even mortals had weapons, armor, accessories, and other divine weapons that had the power of strange laws. Magi were used to calling them divine items. It was a pity that there were no dark gods in the Faerun Plane. Otherwise, the dark witches would definitely group up and kill the followers of the dark gods in order to obtain these divine artifacts. Prophecy, Grimm reminded with a smile, just in case Ulthar suddenly coveted it. Of course it's prophecy. Otherwise, why would Alice be willing to risk her life? Ulthar said disdainfully, and then glanced at Grimm. What price did Alice pay for you to work so hard for her? With your talent and strength, if you're willing to join us, I can guarantee you a higher position than you have now. Of course, if you like women, I have a good collection. Mary, who had been listening at the side, could not help but giggle when she heard this. Since you're talking about this, I'll take my leave. It'll save you a lot of trouble later. With that, Mary left with a light smile. Seeing Mary's sexy and alluring figure, Ulthar could not help but lick his lips. Your companion is good stuff, but her identity is a little awkward. Ulthar stared at Mary swaying back and forth for a while before turning to Grimm. I'm warning you. Tell your female companion to restrain herself. No one will care what she does in this world, but if she wants to infect other magi in the Magus world, be careful not to get caught by the Witch Punishment Union. Once the Union sets their sights on her, even a rank 4 Magus won't be able to protect her. Witch Punishment Union? Don't be fooled by the fact that you're already a rank 2 Magus, and you're considered a big shot in the Central Continent. However, as long as you don't become a member of the 3 great Magus organizations, you won't be able to come into contact with the true upper echelons of the Magus world. The 3 great Magus organizations are located at the borders of the Magus continent, and there are no borders between them. Hence, the scattered tower forest in the middle is the best buffer zone. The reason why the scattered tower forest is able to remain outside of the three great Magus organizations and occupy the largest and most resource-rich land in the central continent isn't because of their own strength, but because of a tacit agreement between the three organizations. Close to 10,000 years have passed, and the central continent is so rich in resources, talents, and resources, yet there hasn't been a single Magus clan that can rival the three great Magus organizations. Don't you think it's strange? You're saying that the three great Magus organizations are secretly suppressing the Magus clans in the central continent? Grimm did not expect Ulthar to reveal so many secrets of the Magus world to him. It's not a secret at all. Ulthar laughed coldly. The three great magi have representatives in the scattered tower forest, but it's hard for any of them to gain an absolute advantage. Do you think those old fellows in the central continent can't see that they're just unwilling to fall out with the three great magi? Then the Witch Punishment Union you mentioned, the Witch Punishment Union doesn't belong to any of the three great Magus organizations. It's a secret organization formed by the elite magi of the central continent. Its purpose is to punish those who don't follow the rules of the Magus world, or those who do something that angers the heavens. An independent organization that doesn't belong to the three great Magus organizations. Grimm asked doubtfully. Don't tell me it's an underground organization created by those old fellows in the central continent to fight against you? Ulthar was slightly stunned and could not help but stare at Grimm again. You're quite smart. You're right. The Witch Punishment Union is an underground organization created by those grade 4 old fellows in the scattered tower forest. It's to cross the boundaries of the families and gather the high-ranking magi of the central continent. They claim to punish those dark magi who don't follow the rules, but in reality, they're mainly targeting the representatives of the three great magi organizations in the scattered tower forest. Once someone crosses the line, they'll attack without mercy. We're not from the three great magi, but you're just small fries. If that female companion of yours can't help but attack a Magus of the same rank, even if it's just for show, those old fellows from the Witch Punishment Union won't let her go. All right, I understand. Grimm scratched his head in distress. Lord Ulthar, let's get back to the main topic. Are you willing to go with us? Do you think I'm crazy enough to accompany you to the dragon nest to die? That green dragon's nest isn't in the dragon nest. It seems to be a traitor amongst the green dragons, and has been chased out of the dragon nest by the emerald dragons and green dragons. It's currently residing in a very remote mountain range in the central continent. This news is getting more and more wonderful. So wonderful that I can't help but agree. Is there any better news? That green dragon isn't in its nest. It's already rushed to the scar of death. That prophecy demigod item is yours now. However, I want half of the other treasures, and I have to pick first. Chapter 703. 7 days later. In a mountain range near the central mountain range, the giant floating ship slowly descended from the sky. The mountains here were undulating, and the perilous peaks stood in great numbers. The continuous green sea of trees here was also cut into countless broken green flowers, scattered around the perilous mountains like stars. Green dragons belonged to the forest dragon clan and liked a warm and humid environment, so they would never place their lair on the cold and empty mountain peaks. That was why the green dragon Aogu's lair was in a valley at the foot of this mountain range. Because the green dragon had been here for a long time, there were no longer any large, ferocious magic beasts within several hundred kilometers of this mountain. Even the former demon wolf overlord had no choice but to move far away with his descendants after the arrival of the green dragon. To be honest, because of the green dragon Aogu's tyrannical personality and bad temper, even the elves did not dare to easily step into his territory. Therefore, when the green dragon Aogu was conscripted to the front lines of the war, this valley became an unguarded treasure house. No, it was not actually unguarded. In order to protect his wealth, the green dragon Gu drove a group of kobolds from a nearby cave into the dragon cave and conscripted them as his servants. In this way, the dragon cave had servants to take care of, and at the same time, they could watch the door for him. It had to be said that although these kobolds were not very strong, they were very good at serving dragons. Thus, in this secluded and remote valley, Green Dragon Gu had lived freely for nearly 100 years. It was because Grimm's group had investigated this place thoroughly that they dared to barge in and arrived at this secluded valley on the floating airship. It was only when the huge metal hull of the floating ship descended above the valley, completely blocking the bright sunlight, that the kobold guards were lazily curled up at the entrance of the dragon cave realized something was wrong. Along with the ear-piercing sirens and the noisy barking of dogs, the entire dragon cave was in complete chaos. The kobolds, who bullied the weak and feared the strong, turned around and hid inside the dragon cave when they saw that the enemy was strong. They closed the crude wooden door, made of wood and branches, with a bang. With the size of the entrance to the dragon cave, these two wooden doors couldn't even cover half of it. From afar, apart from looking at it, it didn't have any defensive function at all. The forest magical beasts that were enslaved by the green dragon to act as watchdogs poked their heads out of the surrounding caves to peep a few times. When they saw that something was wrong, they immediately shrank back. This time, the enemy seemed to be very aggressive. It was better not to go out and die. As for the green dragon's punishment, no matter how severe the punishment was, it couldn't be more terrifying than death. Grimm, who was using his powerful mental power to monitor the surroundings of the dragon cavern, saw this, and a faint smile appeared on his cold face. As he gently nodded, the 20 or so metal puppets that had been waiting at the edge of the ship descended from the ship under the leadership of the Goblin Ripper. Asterisk thud, thud, thud. Asterisk after a series of muffled loud noises, they pulled out their thick mechanical legs from the deep earth, and black muzzles poked out from their metal bodies. Then they walked towards the dragon cave gate that wasn't too far away, their footsteps shaking the earth and mountains. For a moment, the entire valley was filled with the metallic clanking of the metal puppets. Standing on top of the floating ship, Grimm coldly looked around at the green forest around him. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he couldn't help but let out a cold smile. Out of nowhere, Grimm started to chant an obscure witchcraft incantation. As his voice grew louder and louder, the undulating forest around him gradually responded with a trace of magic. In the air, strands and strands of magic elements that were hard to see with the naked eye began to quickly gather towards him, condensing into a gate of summoning filled with mysterious runes in the air. Soon, with a violent surge of magic, a wormhole appeared in the middle of the gate of summoning. The Grade 3 Thunder Dragon Avli once again revealed its robust azure body in front of everyone. It struggled to move its body in the air, and only after 3 minutes did Avli finally break free of the wormhole. "Kid, you owe me from last time." As soon as it came out of the wormhole, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon impatiently complained to Grimm. However, before it could finish, it stopped abruptly. The Grade 3 Thunder Dragon turned its body towards the northeast, sniffing the air as if there was something in the air that interested it. "Lord Avli, I've already promised to introduce you to a group of green dragons. How is it? Have you smelled the scent of a dragon?" Grimm asked politely. "Not bad, not bad." Avli sniffed the air, its domineering eyes filled with unconcealable excitement. "I've looked it up when I got back. This Farron plane isn't registered in the dragon race's scripture, so it's still considered a wild dragon. If I can guide them to the glory of the great dragon god, I'll definitely be rewarded by him." The more it spoke, the more excited it became, and Avli's enormous azure dragon wings began to flap violently. "Little wizard, if you succeed this time, I'll give you credit. These 2 summons will be free of charge. If you have any enemies you can't deal with in the future, just call me. As long as it's not those Grade 4 old fellows, I'll beat them until they run away." Having said that, Avli didn't have the time to converse with Grimm any longer. It quickly rose into the air, flying towards the dragon's cliff in the central mountain range. Grim waited until the violent winds from the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon died down before turning his gaze to a distant snowy peak. You guys sure can keep your composure. A group of elves was hiding in a cave made of ice crystals at the top of the snowy peak that Grim was staring at. They were observing the movements in the Dragon Cave Valley through a magic mirror. There weren't many elves in this group, but every one of them was shockingly strong. There was a weapons grandmaster, a magic archer, a druid elder, a noble and elegant dragon covered in emerald scales, and a powerful and terrifying green dragon. However, the one that truly attracted everyone's attention was a young, cold male elf. The male elf wasn't that tall, but his limbs were strangely soft, flexible, and well-proportioned. He only wore a thin set of elven leather armor and carried 2 long and narrow blades on his back. A golden braid trailed behind him, reaching his waist. On his body, there was almost no dazzling magic aura, and there was no bulging muscles. However, when he stood there quietly, all the elves in the area couldn't help but focus their gazes on him, their gazes filled with admiration and respect. Even the 2 proud dragons couldn't help but hold their breaths when they saw this male elf, afraid that their breathing would offend this honorable Grade 4 powerhouse. Yes, the person in charge of the demon-slaying operation today was the Grade 4 Galestorm Sword Saint, Agassi. For a long time, the attention of the Elven Kingdom had been firmly pinned down by the Pale Witches of the Huin Islands. Almost 40% of the kingdom's troops and more than half of the powerhouses were stationed in Greenwater City, completely blocking the Pale Witches outside of the Kalan continent. Unfortunately, what they didn't expect was that the Grade 2 team of 30 witches had actually turned the heart of the Kalan continent upside down and plunged the people into misery and suffering. Not to mention the elven villages that were slaughtered along the coast, the witches lured a Grade 3 druid elder into the Scar of Death, triggering the undead rebellion there. This was a blood debt that could not be washed away even with all the water in the Milky Way. Moreover, while the elves' main force was pinned down by the undead tide, they actually ran to the central mountain range and destroyed the Pegasus Spring, the holy land of the Pegasus race. This punch landed on the elves' bodies. It was simply a bone-piercing pain. Almost without hesitation, after consulting the gods, the elves sent such a powerful team to ambush these hateful witches. In order to track them down, Vicenna, the goddess of luck of the elven pantheon, specially held many prophecy rituals for them. Finally, the elves figured out the ultimate goal of these evil witches in the Kalan continent. It turned out it was actually for a low-grade quasi-relic created by the fallen god of prophecy, Hansen, the prophecy scepter. This prophecy scepter was tailor-made by the god of human prophecy, Hansen, for his descendants. At the same time, in order to accommodate the strength of a younger generation, the prophecy scepter's materials were reduced again and again, and the power of laws was weakened again and again. Only then was this quasi-relic reduced to the point where it could be used by a Grade 2 deity. It was a pity that Hansen had unfortunately fallen in the last continental expedition. This deity also died tragically on the Kalan continent. Thus, this prophecy scepter fell into the hands of the elves on the Kalan continent. Of course, Vicenna, the goddess of luck, did not care about such a weak quasi-relic, and the other elven prophets could not compete with the Grade 2 green dragon. So, after many twists and turns, this prophecy scepter finally became one of the many collections of the green dragon Ogo. After knowing the ultimate goal of these witches, the elves took the opportunity to set up this trap. On one hand, they pretended to recruit the green dragon Ogo to the front line, and on the other hand, they gathered a large number of strong elves around Ogo's dragon nest, ready to take advantage of the gap when the witches entered the dragon nest. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, this time the elves did not mobilize the elven army at all. Moreover, in this ice cave, there was a divine emblem of the goddess of luck, Vicenna. Chapter 704. Green Dragon Ao Gu was extremely angry. Through the water mirror, He saw a group of vicious people rushing into his dragon cave, wantonly slaughtering the kobolds and crazily destroying the magic traps. Green Dragon Aogu's heart was filled with torment. In order to make it seem real, in order to prevent the Witch of Destiny from noticing the slightest changes in the flood of destiny, Green Dragon Aogu didn't even dare to secretly transfer some of his wealth, especially that prophecy scepter, which was the most precious and valuable item in his small collection. But in order to avoid alerting the enemy, Aogu could only let it remain in the dragon cave, quietly waiting for a group of robbers to come and plunder it. Although the elves promised to pay double for all losses, but that was a semi-divine artifact. If it was accidentally lost, could the elves really have the ability to pay double? The more he thought about it, the more irritable Aogu's heart became. More than once, it slapped its tail in irritation. Its tail, which was wrapped in fine green dragon scales and had distinct joints, cracked the crystal-clear ice layer behind it. Ice shards flew everywhere. Dragon wealth was the most sacred and inviolable right of every dragon. Even the almighty dragon god didn't have the authority to force a dragon to hand over their treasures and wealth. Therefore, although Aogu had left countless magic traps in the dragon cave to protect his wealth, in the end, those were inanimate objects. In the face of this group of thieves who came prepared, even if there were 10 times more magic traps, they would still be useless. Looking at the magic flames and ice fragments constantly spewing out from the dragon cave, Aogu knew that these hateful guys were madly destroying the magic traps. If this was just an ordinary treasure-stealing squad, facing such a large number of high-quality magic traps, they would definitely retreat. But the group in front of him didn't have the slightest scruple. They didn't have time to dismantle these troublesome magic traps one by one, so they used the clumsiest and most violent method to destroy the magic traps. That was to use metal magic puppets to walk the mines inside. Metal magic puppets were tall and sturdy lumps of iron, with outstanding physical defense and good magic resistance. Using such puppets to walk through the winding corridors, most of the magic traps inside would be triggered. The Flame Ripple trap could continuously release 3 wave-shaped flame shockwaves. The Dense Magic Arrow trap could shoot 18 magic arrows indiscriminately in all directions. The Acid Spray trap could shoot out a ball of strong acid. The acid used in this trap was directly provided by the rank 2 Green Dragon Aogu. If it hit its target, it would be enough to melt a rank 1 wizard and his shield into a puddle of mud. The Ice Freezing Gas trap could instantly freeze the entire passageway into a 2-meter thick ice crystal. Anyone who was hit by it would definitely die. The Finger of Death trap could activate the terrifying Finger of Death spell. Any creature with a weak soul would instantly die, ignoring defense. It had to be said that in order to protect his wealth and residence, Green Dragon Aogu had spent a huge amount of money and effort. Not to mention the wealth of the WYRMS in the depths of the Dragon Cavern. Just the variety of magic traps added together would be worth tens of thousands of magical crystals. But now, they could only be wasted on a cheap piece of metal. One metal puppet fell, and the second metal puppet took its place. The second metal puppet fell, and the third metal puppet took its place, relying on this barbaric and violent method. The magic puppet team continued to advance in the depths of the Dragon Cavern. The ear-piercing alarm in Green Dragon Aogu's mind rang incessantly. For a dragon, magic traps did not represent all the defenses of the Dragon Cavern. The one that could truly protect the Dragon Cavern was naturally the master of the Dragon Cavern, the WYRMS. Hence, there were many magic traps in the Dragon Cavern, and the alarms were as dense as the stars in the sky. As long as an outsider intruded, the WYRMS would immediately be alerted by the alarms no matter where they were. At that time, even if they were thousands of miles away, the WYRMS would still rush back without a care for their own safety to block those damned thieves in the Dragon Cavern. However, at this moment, Green Dragon Aogu could only allow the alarms to ring frantically in his mind, unable to do anything about it. He could not help but become restless once more. Aogu, bear with it. The slender and elegant emerald female dragon Aratina turned around and comforted him. Those evil magi have yet to enter the dragon cavern. If we attack now, we might scare them away. If that happens, it will be difficult to catch them all in one fell swoop. Just bear with it a little longer. With the comfort of this beautiful dragon, Aogu's heart finally calmed down a little. However, before he could get close to the beautiful female dragon, the scene that appeared in the magic mirror made Aratina cry out in surprise. That damned wizard actually summoned a powerful Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. Not long after the Thunder Dragon appeared, it actually took off towards the dragon cliff. What was it trying to do? What was that Tier 3 Thunder Dragon doing at the dragon cliff? The more she thought about it, the more she panicked. At this moment, even the beautiful female dragon could not remain calm. For no reason, an ominous premonition arose in the hearts of the two WIRMS. Aratina, don't worry. The Tier 4 Gale, Sword Saint Agassi, seemed to see through the beautiful female dragon's thoughts and comforted her gently. There are several Tier 4 Emerald Dragons guarding the dragon cliff. A mere Tier 3 Thunder Dragon will not be able to cause any harm. Even so, the two WIRMS still could not calm down. They had a feeling that once the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon reached the dragon cliff, the fate of the forest dragons would very likely take an unpredictable turn. Lord Agassi, we need to expel that Thunder Dragon from this plane immediately. If you're not willing to stop it, then I can only hurry back to the dragon cliff and command the elders to make preparations. The beautiful female dragon roared urgently. Aogu, let's go. We need to return to the dragon cliff immediately. After finishing her sentence, the beautiful emerald giant dragon Aratina didn't care if she would alert the group of sorcerers in the distance. She quickly crawled to the entrance of the ice seal cave and used a powerful sound wave to shatter the transparent ice crystal before rushing out. The green dragon Aogu hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he flew with Aratina, spreading his wings and flying towards the dragon cliff. Damn it! At this moment, the elves in the cave were secretly cursing the WIRMS for their recklessness, but they had no choice but to follow them out. The goddess of fortune's emblem was etched on the ice crystal that sealed the cave entrance. It could prevent them from being discovered by the witch's divination spells. Now that the ice crystal had been shattered, their traces had been exposed. There was no point in hiding anymore. I'll go and stall them first. You guys come after me. The Grade 4 Gale, Sword Saint, made a prompt decision and immediately gave the order to attack. He himself transformed into a swift tornado and rushed out of the cave. Rushing towards the green dragons, lair 30 miles away at a speed that the naked eye could not follow. As for the other elves, they either sprinted, mounted flying magical beasts, or transformed into ferocious birds of prey. They rushed out of the ice-sealed cave amidst the howls of wolves and eagles. 30 miles away, the green dragon's lair, Grim and Ulthar, who were standing on the floating warship, could clearly see everything that happened at the peak of the snowy mountain in the distance. Seeing that everything was going according to Alice's prophecy, the two of them finally calmed down a little. Don't worry. Since I've taken your benefits, I'll definitely help you to the end. A sinister smile flashed across Ulthar's cold face. As long as this floating warship is as powerful as you say, I'll help you deal with that Grade 4 Sword Saint. Oomph. How can a barbarian who only knows how to wield a sword be a match for us noble magi? Then I'll have to trouble you, Lord Ulthar. Grim smiled and lightly stomped on the floating warship. As a series of messages were transmitted into the giant floating airship, this gigantic metal monster that was floating leisurely above the dragon cave suddenly sank down rapidly. It crushed the tall ancient trees in the surroundings and crashed into the cliff walls of the tall mountain, causing a series of broken rocks to fall. Not only did the floating warship not flee, but it also descended, using its gigantic metal body to block the entrance to the dragon's lair. The Tier 4 Sword Saint, who was in the midst of using wind steps, was stunned when he saw Shurfang's words. Despite his calm and dignified expression, he could not help but reveal a grim expression. No, this isn't right. There's something fishy about this. The strongest intermediate magi here was only grade 3, yet they didn't try to flee when they saw the elves attacking. Instead, they chose to defend themselves. Could there be something strange about this? But before he could think of anything, the metal hull of the floating ship that was half exposed outside the sea of green forest abruptly dispersed a large cloud of black mist like a tidal wave, and quickly condensed in the air into the shape of a middle-aged, witch with a black staff in her hand and a sinister and cold expression. Sensing the cold and sinister aura, the grade 4 Gale, Sword Saint Agassiz, slowly stopped moving. He stepped on a floating pine branch and looked at the 6-meter-tall female magus with a bewildered expression. With his keen intuition, Agassiz could clearly sense that this strange witch, who was neither human nor creature, was also a grade 4 witch. Although the other party's power was too obscure and chaotic, making it difficult to determine whether she was a grade 4 beginner or grade 4 intermediate magus, he was certain that she was a grade 4 magus. This was something that Agassiz found hard to believe. Whether it was the many battles before or the goddess's prophecy, it was clear that the strongest magus in the enemy's team was only a grade 3 magus. In that case, where had this tier 4 dark witch come from? Chapter 705. The appearance of the mysterious tier 4 elves caused them to stop in their tracks. Tier 4. There's actually a tier 4 elves among the enemies? Before they could figure out the answer to this question, a new problem popped up in their minds. If a battle broke out between 2 tier 4 elves, wouldn't it be extremely dangerous for them to stay here? Hence, the elves who had been valiantly fighting a moment ago turned around and fled without any hesitation. In order to escape, many elves even activated their precious acceleration tools. This was the first time Ulthar had tasted such violent magical energy surging around her. She bent over and stared at the fleeing elves with a sinister smile. The arrogance and conceit in her heart made her feel like she was on fire. After all, many of these ants that were fleeing in all directions were fellows of the same cultivation realm as him. Yet now, all she had to do was show her face, and they could only flee at the sight of her. This feeling of holding the life and death of one's enemy in the palm of her hand was simply intoxicating. After laughing maniacally to his heart's content, Ulthar's laughter abruptly stopped, and a cold and merciless smile appeared on his face that was formed by the black smoke. He extended his right hand that was shrouded in black smoke and grabbed at the elves that were fleeing in the distance. At this moment, the faster elves were already more than a kilometer away, while the elves at the back were about 800 meters away from Ulthar. However, in the eyes of a rank 4 magus, this distance was no longer an obstacle. A strange, sizzling sound came from the void behind the frantically fleeing elves in the distance. A black, ghostly hand that was around half an acre in size abruptly appeared before grabbing on 5 elves in one go. Among them, there were 4 tier 2 elves and 1 tier 3 elf. These elves, who could be considered top-tier powerhouses on the Callan continent, were now like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. No matter how much they struggled, they could not resist the terrifying ghostly hand's pressure. As the ghostly hand closed, a frightening mist of blood gushed out of it. The sound of bones cracking could be heard as all the elves were crushed into meat paste. Blood, severed limbs, and pieces of flesh rained down from the sky. Almost arranged, Ulthar opened his right hand, revealing the indistinguishable remains of flesh and blood. Flesh, bones, limbs, and weapons and equipment were all crushed by a terrifying force before being fused together. At this moment, the 5 elves had completely fused together, and there was no distinction between them. The rest of the elves were all dumbfounded, but a deep sense of powerlessness welled up in their hearts. When low-tier creatures encountered a tier 4 powerhouse that stood at the peak of the otherworld, they were practically powerless. Even if the tier 3 elves were here, they could only helplessly flee. The gap between the strong and the weak, between life and death, was so huge that it was even to the extent that it was difficult to make up for it with quantity and skill. This is not your power. Despite such a tragic scene, the Tier 4 Sword Saint managed to catch a glimpse of what was going on. You borrowed this power, the towering black smoke crow laughed maniacally. I can't fool you in the end, but so what if you see through me? Tier 4 power is Tier 4 power. Even if it's borrowed, it's still Tier 4. Amidst his maniacal laughter, Ulthar lightly waved the staff in his left hand. Hundreds of spears of darkness appeared out of thin air and shot towards the Tier 4 Sword Saint. At the same time, Ulthar extended her right hand and controlled the massive ghost hand to slam down on the remaining elves. In the blink of an eye, the remaining elves had already fled more than a kilometer away. Unfortunately, the moment the ghostly hand descended from the sky, their originally light and agile bodies immediately became incomparably heavy. Their movements became sluggish like clay statues, and they could only move forward in an absurd and laughable manner. All of the elves looked up at the monstrous, ghostly hand in horror, and their faces were filled with despair and fear. Unfortunately, at this moment, they couldn't even complete this simple action easily. However, at this critical moment of life and death, a brilliant golden light that transcended time and space suddenly erupted from the center of the ghostly hand. In the blink of an eye, the ghostly hand was chopped into 4 or 5 pieces. With the ghost hand destroyed, the terrifying aura that covered the heavens and the earth also crumbled. The elves who had just escaped from their predicament were overjoyed. However, they didn't even have the courage to look back. They could only continue fleeing into the distance. Ulthar, who was over a kilometer away, suddenly clutched her right hand and screamed in pain. At some point, crisscrossing golden lines had appeared on her smoky palm, dispersing her right hand into clumps of black smoke. Meanwhile, across from her, the Tier 4 Sword Saint calmly sheathed his saber and glared at Ulthar coldly. You're just a pseudo-Tier 4. Do you think you can go up against a real Tier 4 with your borrowed power? Today, I'll show you how a real Tier 4 combatant fights. In the next second, the elven sword sage, who was still 300 meters away, disappeared. Ulthar, who had just been injured, immediately felt a sense of danger. Ignoring the injury on her right hand, she swung the staff in her left hand in a circle and silently erected a thin barrier of darkness. This barrier of darkness had appeared just in time. Almost the moment it rose, hundreds of crisscrossing knife marks appeared on its surface. If not for the protection of the barrier of darkness, the Sword Saint would have already dismembered Ulthar. 1,300 degrees. Although the Tier 4 Sword Saint Agassi's attacks were so fast that they were difficult to capture with the naked eye, their power was not weak at all. An attack of 1,300 degrees was powerful enough to split apart a Tier 2 wizard and his shield. Ulthar wouldn't even have the chance to react or dodge. Agassi silently appeared in front of Ulthar. The two of them stared at each other through the thin barrier. Agassi coldly glanced at Ulthar, then at the barrier made of pure dark matter. Only then did he shift his gaze to the floating ship beneath Ulthar. His sharp intuition told him that this strange dark energy did not belong to the dark which before him. This strange dark force did not belong to the dark which in front of him, but rather it came from the metal spaceship beneath them. The metal spaceship, which had fallen askew at the entrance of the dragon cavern, was like a magic furnace, continuously sending the strange energy into the body of the black smoke witch. It was also because of the ship's energy that the Dark Witch was able to wield the terrifying power of a Tier 4 wizard. However, this power was borrowed and did not truly belong to her. That was why she seemed so stiff and sluggish when using it. Otherwise, a mere 20 Tier 2 and Tier 3 elves would have been able to kill most of them in one move. She wouldn't have caused such an embarrassing situation. Could it be that there was a wizard tower hidden in this metallic ship? Agassi could not help but guess. This was not the first time the elves and witches had fought. After such a long time of life and death battles, they naturally had a certain understanding of each other's fighting methods. The most powerful means that witches used to protect themselves was probably the wizard tower. Although there were not many Tier 4 wizards in the Faron Plain, it would not be a problem to gather more than 10 of them. As for the Pale Witches, there were only 2 or 3 level 4 witches who had crossed over. The difference in the highest combat power between the two sides was so great, but the Faron powerhouses had been unable to expel the witches from the Faron Plain. One of the main reasons was the Wizard Tower. With the blessing and protection of the Wizard Tower, each witch could exert a powerful combat power that was 2 or 3 times their own strength. Therefore, in the face of the Dark Island protected by the Wizard Tower, it was difficult for the Faron powerhouses to completely eradicate it. Therefore, the powerhouses of the Faron Plain retreated to their respective mainland territories. They would rather endure the invasion and harassment of the witches year after year than fight against the Dark Island that would always stand tall. But now, a Dark Witch whose strength was only a Tier 3 had the strength of a Tier 4 wizard with the help of a mysterious power. This other than the Wizard Tower, was there any other means that could do this? Relying on the protection of the Dark Barrier, Black Smoke Wuxia quickly repaired the damage on her right hand. When she saw that the Elven Sword Sage had noticed the floating ship beneath her, she could not help but sneer. "So what if I let you see through me? If you want to destroy the floating ship, you'll have to go through me first." After saying that, Black Smoke Wuxia waved her wizard staff lightly. Hundreds and thousands of dark spears appeared in the void again, madly attacking the Elven Sword Sage. Agassi used Gale's Step and quickly shuttled back and forth around Black Smoke Wuxia. While dodging the dark witchcraft that was as dense as a rain, he kept slashing at the dark barrier. Because his movements were too fast, often before the first scar disappeared, a second scar would appear on top of the first one. No matter how tough the dark barrier was, it would not be able to withstand such a fierce attack. Therefore, with a crisp cracking sound, the dark barrier that protected Black Smoke Wuxia finally collapsed. Of course, Agassi would not miss such an opportunity. With a step, he flashed to Black Smoke Wuxia's side. However, just as he was about to use the swift sword formation to cut this hateful enemy into pieces, a kind of intuition that came from the depths of his soul silently surged in his heart. Agassi, who treasured his combat intuition the most, did not dare to hesitate. He quickly turned around and actually dodged 100 meters away in the blink of an eye. This was not the teleportation or flash that spellcasters often used. It was just a kind of strange vision formed when an individual's movement speed reached a certain extreme. In the next second, a large mass of dark matter that spread out from Black Smoke Wuxia's body completely enveloped the area within 100 meters around her. If Agassi was still there at this moment, he would definitely not be able to escape the invasion and assimilation of the dark matter. Agassi turned around in horror and instantly felt the terrifying lethality from the dark matter that made him feel despair. Chapter 706. The battle between the two level 4 Magi continued. Meanwhile, in the floating warship beneath Black Smoke Wuxia, everyone was already bustling about. Many metal cabins were pierced through, and all unnecessary facilities were removed. The interior of the cabin was carved with all sorts of mysterious runes. When powerful magical energy flowed within, the runes would occasionally flash with a dazzling magical glow. Thick metal pipes crisscrossed one after another, guiding the magical energy extracted from the spatial furnace to every part of the huge ship's body bit by bit. Due to the crudeness of the temporary modifications, the connections of these energy pipes would occasionally leak out a shocking amount of magical energy. Every time this happened, the gnome engineers would shout and order the maintenance robots to rush forward to do some maintenance. Even though there were over 10 gnome engineers, over 30 gnome technicians, and over 100 construction robots working against time to maintain the ship, the amount of magical energy leaking out of the energy pipes had reached a shocking level. As a result, in some areas of the ship, the dense magical energy had formed a terrifying death zone. Ordinary gnomes would be killed if they got close. Such an area could only be entered by magi with extremely high magic resistance and defensive spells. At this moment, the giant floating ship had already lost the ability to fly. All the useless and ineffective facilities on the ship had been dismantled and transformed into metal pipes that transported magical energy. The giant floating ship had also transformed from a flying vehicle for magi into a temporary wizard tower. What was a wizard tower? It was just a special wizard spell facility that assisted magi in battle and in life. To build a wizard tower, the most important thing was to construct a source of magical energy. As for ordinary wizard towers, most of them used the elemental altar to draw energy from the outside world. The giant floating ship did not have much else, but the space furnace installed in its core could be transformed into a source of magical energy for a wizard tower through the simplest modifications. Furthermore, it was stronger and more violent. Hence, the airship had been working hard on this fundamental modification during the long period it had been staying on the island. When it landed on the ground in the Dragon Cave, it could no longer fly with its own strength. However, with the support of a massive amount of energy, as well as the various types of wizard formations drawn all over the ship, the entire floating ship was transformed into a temporary wizard's pagoda. Without a sturdy tower to act as a medium, they had to use the thick metal shell of the battleship. Without the runic circuits all over the tower to act as energy transmission channels, they had to use crude metal channels. Without a strange tower spirit, Grimm stood up without hesitation and turned himself into a spirit to act as the central control crystal. Coupled with the defensive spell formations and offensive spell formations inscribed on the various parts of the ship, a wizard pagoda system that was full of flaws but could barely function was constructed. Under Grimm's careful and meticulous command, the resources, manpower, and resources of the floating warship were put to good use, becoming the most powerful support for the Black Smoke above. However, as the battle between Black Smoke and the Tier 4 Elven Sword Saint grew more intense, the simple wizard pagoda's energy backlash grew more intense. Every time the two Grade 4 experts clashed, it would cause the energy in the pipes to flow in reverse. These normal metals were obviously unable to withstand the corrosion and vibrations of such terrifying magical energy, and a large amount of magical energy began to leak out. Within the floating warship, continuous explosions of energy could be heard. Close to half of the gnomes had been killed by the terrible environment within the warship. The remaining gnome engineers and technicians could only survive by hiding within the bodies of the magic puppets. While Grimm was meticulously controlling the energy system of the wizard's pagoda to provide the Black Smoke Uxer with the greatest amount of energy, he was also controlling the engineering androids, tirelessly welding and sealing the more and more energy leaks on the metal pipes. As for the metal pipes that had been damaged by the explosions and had lost their value of repair, they could only set up temporary pipes to replace the damaged parts. As the battle progressed, there were more and more temporary pipes like this, and the efficiency of the energy system to transmit magical energy became lower and lower. In the end, even the low-grade wizards did not dare to enter the most heavily leaked areas of the ship. Even with their abilities, there was a high chance that they would die if they entered these areas recklessly. The rumbling outside could be heard from time to time in the secret tunnel of the dragon lair. Every now and then, even the mountain where the dragon lair was located would tremble uncontrollably. Broken rocks fell from the walls, and the secret tunnel was filled with the smell of dust and debris. The magic traps in the secret tunnel had all been cleared. The weak Alice barely managed to move into the dragon lair with the help of a few witches of destiny. To be honest, the hall where the giant dragon slept would be as simple and crude as an ogre's kennel, if not for the glittering gold coins and gems. In an unusually large and spacious hall made of stone, there were broken stalagmites and black walls everywhere. But strangely, there were no bugs, moss, or lichens. The floor in the center of the hall was piled high with glittering gold coins, various magical gems, weapons, armor, and magical tools. All the witches and wizards who entered the dragon lair were shocked by the dazzling scene in front of them, and they almost stopped breathing. As noble magi who stood at the peak of the secular world, each of them had undoubtedly gathered an astonishing amount of wealth and resources. However, compared to the scene in front of them, there was still a huge disparity between them and the scene in front of them. Look at the several meters thick gold coins, enough to bury a strong adult man, without even being able to see his figure. Look at the huge magical gems buried in the pile of gold coins, constantly shining with magical fluorescence. Looking at the magic swords and gorgeous armors that were shrouded in brilliance, each of them had a unique and exquisite design. Although most of the magical weapons and tools could not be equipped with the body of a giant dragon, this did not hinder the giant dragon's burning desire to collect all the wealth and treasures in the world. And at the top of this dazzling pile of gold coins and gems, there was a strangely shaped magic scepter that shone with a five-colored light. Circles of magic aura surged and formed a rainbow that was clearly visible. Even with Alice's calmness, at this moment, she could not help but feel a little short of breath. At this moment, Alice was so weak and old. Other than her long hair that had turned silver, even her originally smooth face and skin had become abnormally haggard and wrinkled. Alice, who was not even 100 years old, should have been at the peak of her life, but from her appearance, it was obvious that she was an old woman who was nearing the end of her life. She stood side by side with poison dwarf Ender. Outsiders would only think of them as a pair of old sisters, but who would know that they were separated by 5 generations of blood. With the methods of wizards, as long as it was not the end of their life, their body and appearance could be changed through witchcraft so that they would always remain in the prime of their life. Only when one was nearing the end of their life, due to the decay of their soul and the fading of their wizard power, would they show obvious signs of old age. As for a witch of destiny like Alice, her body was surging with wizard power, and her soul was also full of vigor. It was obvious that she was at the peak of her life, but the life force in her body was as weak as a flickering, dim candle flame that could be extinguished at any time. It was because of the huge deficit of life force that caused her soul to not be nourished as it should have been, and it began to wither and become dim. Although wizards had thousands of ways and means to absorb life force, they could not do anything to Alice, whose life force had been devoured because of the backlash of fate. Fate was always fair. No matter how much you took from it, it would also take away the most precious things from your life. In the last trip to the underground, in order to divine a mysterious item for that existence from another world, Alice's life force had been directly reduced by 40 years. If she could not successfully advance this time, she would only have a month to live. Therefore, when she suddenly saw the prophecy scepter that could sustain her life, it was not easy for outsiders to understand the excitement in Alice's heart. "All of you get out." Alice struggled to stand in front of the pile of gemstones, and said calmly without turning her head, "Tell Grimm to give me 2 more hours. If I don't come out in 2 hours, let him run for his life." The few witches of destiny beside her nodded, bowed, and left the hall of the dragon lair. The poison centipede Ender also sighed and silently retreated. At the entrance of the hall, the violent witch Sophia and the ice witch Chef looked at each other and chose to quietly guard there. The only new witch left, with a face full of worry, turned around and ran to pass on the last command of the leader. Poison centipede Ender anxiously paced 2 rounds at the entrance of the hall, but at this moment, the mountain shook violently again, and countless dust and stone fragments fell from the top of the wall where they were standing. "No, I can't just wait here. You 2 guard here. Don't let anyone disturb Alice. I'll go up and help." After giving a few simple instructions, Poison centipede Ender left with a murderous aura. Both Sophia and Chef were resurrected by Alice after she advanced to become a witch of destiny. Therefore, their souls were firmly bound to Alice's. If Alice died, they would die. With Alice's advancement, their strength also rose, which was greatly beneficial to the improvement of their strength. Therefore, when their fates were intertwined, they could not help but feel anxious. "Chef, do you think Alice can advance?" The burly Sophia could not help but lower her voice and asked impatiently, "A chance is still a chance." Chef replied calmly, "The power of destiny will only point out a chance to escape from death, but whether or not one can grasp the chance and escape from that chance still depends on one's strength and luck. So, we can't help her now. The only thing we can do is to pray for her and hope that she can have good luck." That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.